The request for the most secret dream was sincerely uttered under the arches of the magic temple. The girl dreamed that her own husband would love only her. The lone figure of a prostrate girl stood before the magical statue. The supplicant begged that this would happen even after death. Renya Lepore sobbed. This was the wish she had made. She folded her hands in prayer. She looked at the sculpture with tears in her eyes. The young lady had a very good reason to make such a wish. The girl approached the statue. Crying, she hugged the stone pedestal with her hands. Her father, Coriolano, hid his pain from losing his wife at an early age behind his desire to become rich. The man tried to do everything possible to ensure that he managed to accumulate a huge fortune. But his main dream was high status. And most of all, her father's gaze was riveted on one heir of a ruined aristocratic family. The man looked at the slender blonde with admiration. The young lord allowed him to be called Edwin Lepore. He extended his hand to his future relative. Just as Edwin wanted to improve his family's position, the girl's father wanted to gain status through her marriage. Thus, Renia became a noble lady. At the wedding, her father cried. The man confessed that he would finally be able to find peace. The young lady did not want a noble family name. The wedding ceremony took place in a Catholic church, where they were pronounced husband and wife. The girl looked at her fiancé with love and tenderness. She sincerely desired his heart. The newlywed husband leaned over Renya. He confessed to his bride that his heart belonged only to her, until the end of their days. The girl was delighted. The brunette felt the coldness that emanated from Edwin. The husband could not accept the way his wife's father managed the money. Over time, the blonde's discontent began to spread to his young wife. 3 years later, the stone walls of the huge mansion were striking in their architecture. A promise was made to do everything possible to take care of someone. Renya peered into the room cautiously and froze in shock, her mouth hanging open. Her husband was telling another woman that his heart belonged to her forever. Lady Lepore watched from the side as her husband gazed intently into the eyes of the red-haired Freya with tenderness on his face. Renya's father sent a new maid to serve them so that she could pay off his debts, and the girl immediately won Edwin's heart. The lady was in despair. She tried not to scream from insult. Freya easily achieved what the brunette had failed to achieve in 3 years with incredible efforts. Quiet, stealthy footsteps echoed through the tense silence of the room. Lady Lepore tiptoed into the empty room. The brunette mentally apologized to the maid. The deceived wife came into the room to throw the earring. She dreamed that the homewrecker would pack her things. Suddenly, the young lady's gaze fell on the maid's bag, which stood on the dressing table. The brunette's gaze was drawn to a scarlet stone at the bottom of the bag, and some ancient piece of paper rolled into a roll. The girl carefully pulled the scroll out of the bag. Renya unfolded an ancient map indicating the location of the wish-granting statue. All she had to do was hand over the stone and receive her wish. The brunette was shocked by her rival's insidious plans. This couldn't be. Did Freya really want to win her husband's heart? Renya wondered if Edwin would truly love her if she made a wish. In her dreams, the brunette had already heard her husband confess that she was his only love. She imagined a sobbing, red-haired rival. Our heroine decided that it couldn't get any worse. She encouraged herself with enthusiasm. She decided that she absolutely had to go to the statue that granted wishes. In the present tense, the statue's booming voice clarified her wish. Summarized, she wanted her husband to always love only her, even after death. Suddenly, the sculpture came to life and waved its hand casually. It said that the brunette's wish had been fulfilled. It was time for her to leave. Renia didn't immediately believe it. The girl kept bowing low. Her voice trembled with sincere gratitude. Words of gratitude to Mr. Statue kept escaping from her lips. Renya left the temple in a rapturous mood. The girl was glad that her cherished dream had come true. The magical statue was watching the visitor. The brunette felt incredible joy that everything happened the way she wanted. At that time, the young lady did not yet know that her family happiness would not last long. A piercing scream tore through the night silence, echoing off the dark walls of the mansion. The majestic mansion had witnessed a tragedy. The servants were sobbing and wiping their faces with handkerchiefs. They explained to Renya that her husband had suddenly fainted and stopped breathing. The brunette screamed. She called her husband by name. Tears were pouring from the eyes of the young lady. She thought that her husband was really dead because she made that stupid wish. Hot drops flowed down the face of the grieving girl and fell on the lifeless face of Lord Edwin. And then a miracle happened. The blonde shuddered. He opened his eyes, and in a hoarse voice he said his wife's name. The girl was in shock. Her dead husband had come back to life. The maid and the butler were trembling with fear. They watched silently. Renya stepped back from the rebel. The blonde man sat up with a smile. The young man was not a living, breathing person. Renya was sobbing and trying to run away. Her husband was trying to catch up with her. The deceased was perplexed why his wife rejected his love. He tried to catch up with the brunette with a bouquet of flowers. Renya hiccuped with fear. The Lord was like a living corpse. The blonde handed his wife a bouquet as she ran away. He asked her to accept the flowers. The brunette tried to run away as fast as she could. She screamed at Edwin that he smelled like carrion. From that moment on, the deceased only swore his love for his wife, and with each passing day, he decomposed more and more. He explained that he smelled like dead flesh because he was dead. The girl was crying all the time. One night, Renya threw earth into the grave where her late husband was. The blonde reminded her that he had sworn to love her even after death. The living dead man covered himself with his hands from the clods of earth flying at him. He asked why the girl rejected him. He asked her to stop. The brunette admitted that she was very sorry, but she couldn't do otherwise. The young lady continued throwing clods of earth into the grave. Renya didn't stop what she was doing. She was burying the blonde. She said that her thoughts didn't matter. She believed that the dead should lie in the ground. Edwin covered himself with his hands from the clods of earth flying at him. He looked at his wife. He said that he had figured out the reason why she rejected his feelings. Dead meant that he was dead and his wife was not. These words made the girl break out in a cold sweat. She stared at her dead husband in fear. The blonde stretched his hands out of the grave to the girl. He said that he knew a way for them to be together forever. The dead man grabbed the brown-haired woman by the leg and pulled her towards his grave. The girl resisted and screamed at her husband, trying to stop him. The young lady kicked and tried to throw the dead man's hand off her leg, but the deceased held her very tightly and was not going to let go of his prey. The blonde threw her to the bottom of the grave. He noticed that he could not be alive again, but that did not mean that his wife could not join him in death. The man held Renya's arms tightly at her sides, calmed her down, told his dear wife not to be afraid. Renya begged her husband to let her go. The brunette lay in panic at the bottom of the grave, shaking with fear. Tears were pouring from her eyes. Her dead husband confessed his feelings. The dead man confessed his love to his sweet Renya even after his death. A loud, desperate cry of horror echoed across the deserted cemetery. Blood splattered in all directions and stained the ground at the bottom of the grave. That was how Renya died. The girl's soul reasoned that she should not have worried about Edwin and Freya's affair. She should have wished for something more reasonable. With belated regret, Renya thought that perhaps she should have been better. Suddenly, the brunette was again transported to the moment when she was kneeling in front of the magic statue, and the sculpture was asking about her wish. The girl looked around in surprise. Everything was repeating itself with incredible precision. Renya was in that place again and saw the magical statue. The sculpture was again before her eyes. Renya was surprised that she was able to return to this temple again. The statue asked if the girl was not here to make a wish. The brunette was glad that such a question. She even began to stutter a little, speaking about her desire. She did not understand what kind of ominous feeling it was. The girl quickly touched herself with her hands. She froze for a moment. She was wearing the same clothes as the first time. Renya thought that this couldn't be. Looking at the sculpture, the brunette realized that she had returned to the day when she made her first wish. To check whether it was reality or a dream, the girl pinched her cheek. She pulled the skin a little and let it go abruptly. Lady Laporte screamed loudly in pain. Her cheek immediately swelled and turned red. The young lady realized that she really had not slept. The frozen sculpture's face showed no emotion, but it did ask a question. The monument was wondering if the girl would make a wish. The brunette screamed. Exactly. She remembered her desire. How could she forget about it? According to the information on the card, there were several rules that had to be followed when making wishes. Rule number 1. You had to make a wish before the sand in the hourglass ran out. Rule number 2. You were only allowed to make one wish. Rule number 3. Once a wish was made, it could neither be changed nor cancelled. Anyone who tried to break the rules could instantly lose their limbs. They would be torn from their body, and the person himself would turn into a statue. Cold sweat ran down the girl's face. Her whole body shuddered in horror. The brunette did not want to become a statue. Renya thought about it. The sand in the hourglass was already half full. The girl began to formulate her wish anew. She wished to be rich. The statue mentioned that the girl had already wished earlier. The sculpture recalled the beginning of her wish. The brunette wanted her husband. Renia suddenly fell silent. She was speechless from surprise. Stuttering, the brunette asked what they were talking about. She was at a loss as to what to do. She remembered the wish that her husband would love only her, even after death. Had she really said half of the wish already? The magic statue confirmed it. Renia froze in place. The girl was in despair. How she wished she could return to the moment when she had not yet managed to make the first half of her wish. The brunette fell to her knees again and grabbed her head with her hands. The magic statue hurried the girl. Everything had to be done faster. The young lady looked at the hourglass. The sand was falling with a quiet rustling sound. She was almost out of time. She decided that she had enough of fooling around. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she would like her husband. At this point she stopped. She didn't know if she wanted her husband to love her. She thought it was too similar to her first wish. She thought about whether she should wish for her husband to be happy. She immediately realized that she would never make such a wish. She decided that it was as bad as his death last time. The girl did not want this cheater to be happy. Moreover, such a desire could lead to Freya taking her place, and the brunette herself could disappear. The girl was thinking about what wish to make so that Edwin would not die and she would receive benefits. Maybe she should have wished for her husband to be rich. No. She decided that it might lead to her and her father dying and Edwin inheriting their fortune. She imagined her husband crying at her and her father's graves, and swearing to take care of the huge treasuries he inherited after their death. Renia couldn't let her father die. Otherwise, her unfaithful husband could get their fortune. She didn't know what to say. Time was running out. The brunette couldn't make up her mind. She wanted her husband. She couldn't continue with these words. She understood that if she didn't make a wish now, she would die again. There was almost no sand left in the hourglass. Her time was almost up. The girl said that she wished her husband was... At the last moment, the brunette shouted that she wanted the magic statue to become her husband. The last grain of sand fell into the bottom of the clock. Time stopped. The daring desire dissolved into the air, leaving behind an oppressive silence. A magical statue in the form of a muscular young man asked the girl to repeat her wish. Renia, overwhelmed with emotion, no longer understood what was happening. She had had enough. The girl shouted that she wanted him to be her husband. The brunette sat down on the floor. She knew she was about to start crying. She thought about how she had ruined her past life, and now she had ruined her second chance. Suddenly the sculpture turned to Renia. The monument asked if this was really her true wish. If this was really so, then the magic statue was willing to be her husband. Renia was shocked. She wondered why she needed another husband. Monument noticed that the girl did not look happy, although her wish had come true. The brunette feigned joy. In all likelihood, she was still in shock. She said she was very happy. She thanked him for becoming her husband. She thought about it. It seemed she had two husbands now. One cheated on her with her maid. The other was a statue that granted wishes. She noted with irony that it was not even worth thinking about the fact that one could feel unhappy. Suddenly, there was a loud cracking sound. The magical statue began to crumble and collapse. The young man advised the girl to move away. The monument was breaking into pieces. Renia began to carefully step back. She watched as the statue crumbled and fell apart. The brunette did not understand what was happening here. Suddenly, one of the huge pieces fell next to the girl. At the last moment, she managed to avoid injury. A moment later, a naked young man stood in front of the girl. The brunette tried to understand what was happening here. She stared at the naked guy. Her eyes widened in surprise. The girl wondered if the magical statue had simply turned into a human. The guy rubbed his bare shoulder. He asked Renia why she was so surprised. The girl stared at the young man in admiration. The young man admitted that he could not be her husband and her article at the same time. The brunette tried to walk carefully on the floor with his bare feet. The brunette slightly inclined his head to the shoulder and said his name. The young man's name was Beldemer. The living statue appeared in all its naked glory. The brunette said that he was ready to be her husband. Renia did not take her admiring gaze off the man. The naked guy who had just been a statue stood before our heroine. The brunette bowed and said that he agreed to be Renia's husband. The brunette was delighted. If Renia understood correctly, the statue had shed its stone skin and underneath was a living and incredibly beautiful man. The girl could not contain her delighted emotions. Moreover, she understood that this handsome man with an unrealistically perfect body became her husband. Renia was puzzled. Could this really be happening? She looked down from Beldemer's face and blushed. The guy was completely naked. He had nothing on. The girl gasped in surprise. Renya turned away abruptly. Her whole face was flushed with embarrassment. The brunette asked his interlocutor what was wrong. The brunette didn't look at the revived guy. Lady Lepore impolitely pointed her finger at him. She emphasized that the young man was naked. The young man chuckled in surprise. Suddenly, his strong hand pulled Renya closer to him by the waist. He told the girl that she should not take her eyes off him. The young woman wanted to cover her eyes with her hands. She was embarrassed by what was happening. The brunette reminded her that she was now his wife. He said that she had the opportunity to admire him as much as her heart desired. The brunette looked at the young man as if enchanted. Her gaze showed admiration. She wondered if the guy was rushing things too much. Renya gave her cloak to the brunette. The young man tied it around his waist like a loincloth. The young lady thought she had ruined another life. Everything would have been simpler if Beldemer had remained a statue. The brunette asked the guy a question. She asked if he would really be her husband. Renya thought about what might happen if the brunette found out that she had already been married. The handsome man was thinking at that moment about how many people desired him. He remembered how someone secretly snuck into his room to spend the night with him. They tried to seduce the brunette, and others pointed a knife at him. Some just wanted his face. The young man was trying to escape violence. The brunette thought it was very tiring. Renya was quietly watching the guy and his memories. She thought about what might happen if such a narcissist found out that she already had a husband. The girl was sure that this would be a severe blow to his ego. She cut herself off abruptly. So he wasn't always a statue. Maybe he did something bad and was punished. Either way, it was an unpleasant feeling. The guy was amazed. He admitted that no one wanted to possess him as much as Renia did. The brunette was embarrassed. She asked if it was really a compliment towards her. Given how their acquaintance had turned out, the brunette had promised to be a model husband. There was no chance that he, Beldemer, would be anything less than perfect. Renya was shocked by his confession. She clapped her hands. She didn't understand whether she should be grateful to him for this. Despite the brunette's promise, he warned that the girl was not allowed to touch him. Renya was taken aback. It turned out that she could look. Touch, no. She thought about it. It became interesting. She had a husband who she couldn't touch. Renya realized that this made him even more desirable. The brunette folded his arms across his chest. He asked why the girl looked so disappointed. Renya denied it. She replied that she would keep the recommendations in mind. A naked young man walked next to Renya. They were moving through the night forest. The guy asked where she was leading him. The brunette was embarrassed. She stopped. She thought for a while. She spent some time choosing her words. She didn't know how to answer this question. Renya turned to her interlocutor. The skirts of her voluminous dress flew up and fell at her feet. The girl said that she knew of an empty house nearby. They were heading there. It was an estate belonging to the guild. The building was newly built and in a great location, but there was one problem. It had been empty since rumors began to circulate of ghosts wandering its halls. The building had been empty for approximately 3 years. The young people soon found themselves inside the estate. Brunei did not understand why they could not go to Renya's house or her residence. The brunette justified herself by saying that the guild provided her with housing. The girl was sure that the young man would find it uncomfortable. The guy chuckled. He asked if the girl really worked in the guild. The brunette laughed nervously. She noted that it could have been said that way. She thought the guy was exhausted. She suggested that they take a rest and postpone the cleaning until tomorrow. She promised to return soon with clothes for him. The brunette approved of the idea. Renya left the room. In the hallway, she thought. She remembered that she hadn't told the guy about the ghost. The girl walked quickly down the corridor of the empty estate. She thought that it made no difference that she had not told about the ghost. Beldemer lay down on the bed. He examined his hand. He thought about how much time had passed since he had so much freedom. Beldemer admired his fingers, enjoyed the frosty air that touched his bare skin. He closed his eyes. He followed the feeling of cold on the tip of his nose, the smell of dust penetrating his lungs. The young man's eyes widened. The memories of dust were unpleasant. Beldemer tensed. The brunette thought that Shapiro did not suspect his return to the human body. The young man lowered his legs to the floor. He thought that he would be late. There was no help to be had. The young man had no choice but to use his beautiful body to restore order here. Beldemer made several passes with his hands. He tried to cast a spell. The young man tried again and again, but nothing worked. The brunette looked closely at his hands from all sides. He was upset that his magic didn't work. The young man thought about it. He remembered how he had been a statue for a long time. Was it really a curse that was to blame for the lack of magic? Suddenly the boy tensed up. He listened. He could hear extraneous sounds from all sides. Someone was giggling in the empty room. Valdemar cautiously peered out of his room into the deserted corridor. Someone was laughing in the spacious hallway too. The brunette thought that something was hanging around in this house. The guy decided that he should check and boldly walk down the corridor. The laughter of an invisible creature floated down the long corridor and bounced off the walls. The ghostly skull left a faintly glowing trail in the darkness. The morning at the Lepore estate began with loud screams. The maid was surprised when she saw how her lady appeared. She noticed that she looked terrible. The girl covered her face with her hands in fear. She asked the owner if she had gotten into a fight. The brunette was coming into the room from the street. Renya wondered why the maid had spoken of a fight. She asked Annie how old she thought her mistress was. The brunette was wearing a dirty dress. The lady asked if her father knew about her absence the night before. The maid replied that he did. After all, the girl had not spent the night at home. Moreover, Miss Freya had disappeared. Since the girl was also not present at the estate, Mr. Edwin decided that his wife was involved in her disappearance. The maid was relieved to admit that the misunderstanding had been cleared up. Someone had said that they had seen Freya leave the estate alone. The maid was interested in where the mistress had been. She hoped that the absence of the mistress had nothing to do with Miss Freya. The brunette hesitated. She was in no hurry to answer. Lady Lepore said yes and no. Annie screamed, noticed that there was no sense in these words, asked if the lady had drunk it. Renya instantly became serious. She wanted the maid to listen to her very carefully, without hysterics. The girl grabbed the maid by the shoulders. The brunette looked into her interlocutor's eyes with insight. She confessed that she had stolen something from Freya yesterday. The maid could not believe it. Renya told the whole truth, and showed her maid an old map. Annie was surprised. She didn't really believe in a statue that could grant wishes. She asked if it really wasn't just an old legend. The lady thought so too at first. But she was wrong. She decided to tell the truth about what happened. At the end of the story, the brunette grabbed her head. They were already here. Annie covered her mouth with her hand. The girl was horrified. Did the mistress really want to say? Renya agreed with the maid's guess. She confirmed that she had a second husband. The maid was shocked. She covered her mouth in horror to keep from screaming, reminded the lady that this was called polyandry. Such things were against the king's laws. Annie was very frightened. The lady knew about it. The maid was worried that if her mistress was caught, she would be sent to prison for 10 years. And the young lady knew about this too. The girl had the chance to start a new life. But now she faced the chance of spending the next 10 years in chains. Renya thought about it. On the other hand, maybe it would be better if she was thrown into some dungeon. She was worried if Valdemar found out about her current marriage. She remembered how the brunette asked if she would do him a favor by allowing him to become her husband. The brunette was horrified. She decided that it was better for her not to think about what he could do to her. Renya paced the room nervously. Suddenly, it seemed she knew how to get out of this situation. The maid asked what the idea was. The young lady seemed to have made the only right decision. The brunette decided that she had to divorce Edwin. This idea seemed brilliant to Renya, and for some time the girl almost danced with joy and pleasure. The maid silently watched her. Annie cautiously noted that she agreed with the lady. It was indeed a terrific idea. Suddenly, she noticed that her mistress had burst into tears. The maid asked where the lady had taken her new husband. The brunette replied that she had left him in the haunted manor. She had come here for Edwin's clothes. Surprise and curiosity were written on the maid's face. The girl asked why the lady needed Mr. Edwin's clothes. The brunette was embarrassed. Renya was hesitant whether to tell the truth or not. She decided to admit that her new husband was completely naked now. The maid was shocked by such a truth. Sometime later, Renya walked quickly down the corridor of the deserted estate where she had left her new husband. In her hands, she held a bundle of clothes. Suddenly, the girl was distracted by some sounds. The brunette froze and looked somewhere up. The girl wondered what it could be. I forced myself to calm down. I told myself that there were no ghosts here. Renya slowly began to climb the creaky stairs. Some otherworldly sounds were heard around the girl. The young lady stood frozen in fear on the stairs. The girl suspected that something was here. She carefully stepped down the wooden steps. Slowly, step by step, Renya began to descend. Yesterday, the girl saw the statue come to life. How could she now say with certainty that there were no ghosts? If there was something here, Beldemer had to be taken away. The girl threw the door open and screamed loudly. She demanded that the evil spirit leave. She insisted that he leave the room. There was no one in the room. The girl breathed a sigh of relief. Everything was as she thought. She calmed herself down, deciding that ghosts did not exist. She didn't finish her sentence as she saw something hanging from the ceiling. The girl screamed in horror. She didn't understand what it was. The transparent skull hung in the air, a bright light pulsing in its eye sockets. It watched the scene intently. In fear, Renya quickly ran out of the room. The girl slammed the heavy doors behind her with force. The brunette was breathing heavily. She didn't understand what she was doing. The girl realized that there really was a ghost living here. Renya decided that she needed to leave this terrible place as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the brunette heard a cough behind her. The girl turned around abruptly. An unfamiliar young man stood in front of her. The girl shouted, asking who he was. She wondered if the blonde was a ghost too. The girl froze in horror, standing near the doors leading to the room where she had recently seen the ghost. The stranger was silent and smiled mysteriously. Renya demanded an answer. She asked the blonde whether he was a man or a ghost. The young man quickly headed towards the brunette. He replied that he was neither one nor the other. Approaching the girl, the blonde bowed gallantly and asked permission to introduce himself. His name was Shapiro, and he was a faithful servant of the great Beldemer. The young man took the bundle of things from the girl, gallantly offered her to go through, since his master was already waiting for Lady Renya. The brunette put on the suit that the young lady had brought. The handsome man thought that it suited him perfectly. Renya was pleased that all the clothes she had brought suited the brunette. Shapiro complimented Lady Renya. He said that she had a keen eye. Beldemer asked Renya why the brunette was looking at his body like that. Did she really do it to guess his size? The servant doubted it. He expressed the opinion that most likely, Renya did not take her eyes off because she desired the young man. Such a statement outraged the brunette. The girl was a little embarrassed but objected. She stated that the blonde's words did not correspond to reality. The brunette watched as Beldemer's servant touched him all the time. She asked if the brunette hadn't said that he didn't like it when other people touched him. She thoughtfully concluded that perhaps it was because the blonde man was a man. The hand of Beldemer's servant froze in midair. Shapiro turned his attention to the girl. He smiled a crooked smile. He noticed that, as he had told her earlier, he was not human. The unusual servant repeated that he was not a man. The blonde explained that he could not be called either a woman or a man. And he wasn't a ghost either. Renya decided to find out who the blonde man really was. Shapiro closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He admitted that there had been quite a few mortals in his past, like Lady Renya. The blonde enthusiastically recounted that his master had inspired such admiration that huge mountains of love letters had grown up in his honor. Beldemer stood over a huge pile of various correspondence. He grabbed his head. He did not understand what he had to do with these letters. The blonde reported that when important letters were lost in a pile of all this waste paper, his master decided to create a familiar for himself. I hoped the brunette knew what a familiar was. The girl knew. It was a supernatural creature that served as an assistant to a wizard or a witch. Shapiro noted that there was no need for clarification then, and knowing how infinitely talented his master was. The servant paused for a long time. The blonde was not at all surprised that he had created a truly flawless familiar. Shapiro wiped away a tear of affection. His master asked him to stop. Thus, the blonde was accidentally created by his master as a practically ideal being. The brunette concluded, both master and servant. The blonde was effusive in his gratitude. He continued to praise his master. Renya asked Beldemer if this meant that the man was a mage. The brunette confirmed that he was a mage. The button on his vest was holding on with all its might. The girl wondered what kind of mage he was with such a muscular body. The loyal servant obsequiously announced that Lady Renya had married the greatest of them all. The brunette turned sharply towards the two men. The blonde admitted that he thought of the girl as special. But now, at least it seemed that the lady was not trying to deceive his master. Renya stared at the speaker in surprise. She asked what Shapiro meant. The blonde looked down. At first he thought that the reason why his master didn't use magic was because of the girl. But seeing that the brunette mistook the spell below for a ghost, he was sure that the lady was not capable of such a trick. Renya did not understand what was being discussed. She jumped up abruptly and approached the two men. The girl even scared them a little. She asked if the brunette could not use magic. Beldemer turned away and sadly admitted that, to his great regret, this was indeed the case. The girl beamed. This meant that the brunette would not be able to harm her with his magic if he found out that the girl was already married. Suddenly, Renya broke out in a cold sweat. She stopped. She asked about that thing downstairs. She asked if that strange thing wasn't a ghost. All three of them settled down in a cozy, spacious office with bookshelves. The girl was worried. She wondered if it was just magic. The brunette was delighted by the news. It turned out that here, in the basement, there really was an alchemist's workshop. The brunette admitted that when he tried to find the source of the sounds, he discovered that someone had cast a spell on the estate. The magic circles drawn with mana stones throughout the building, as well as the alchemy table in the basement, were invisible due to magical seals. Renya clenched her fists. The girl was already impatient to find out what kind of bastard had been living here all this time and not paying rent. A teapot floated up to the brunette and filled his cup. Beldemer noticed that the servant's magic worked perfectly. But he was gone. Maybe it was the curse. Shapiro confessed to the gentleman that he had one theory. The brunette was genuinely interested. He listened attentively to the servant. The blonde man revealed that it was possible that this was because Lady Renya's wish had not yet been fully fulfilled. Usually once the wish was considered fulfilled, its master would turn back into a statue. But this time it hadn't happened yet. Beldemer agreed. The blonde's words made sense. The brunette rolled up his shirt sleeve and a glowing symbol appeared on his wrist. The young man decided to find out how many wishes he had fulfilled before Renya. The blonde saw the number 50 and told his master about it. Beldemer thought that his servant was probably right. The handsome man froze in thought. He was immersed in heavy thoughts. He agreed that Renya's wish had not yet been fulfilled. The brunette was puzzled as to why he was now in human form. The servant suggested that Renya's wish must be in the process of being fulfilled. Beldemer thought again. It seemed that the blonde's assumption also made sense. The young man remembered how the brunette screamed that she wanted him to be her husband. He thought that after all, Renya's desire was too abstract. The brunette sighed heavily. Shapiro poured himself a cup of tea. He asked what it meant to be a husband. The servant took a sip of the hot drink. He noted that from the woman's point of view, this is the man she married. Suddenly, a brilliant thought struck the blonde. It could be because they weren't officially married. The brunette raised his eyebrows in surprise. He decided to clarify what he meant by officially. Shapiro put his cup on the table. He decided to explain. They just announced that they would be married. Therefore, the gentleman cannot be called her legal husband now. The blonde was sure that the wish had not been fulfilled. His ceremony with Mrs. Renya had not yet taken place, and they had not made their vows. Beldemer's eyes widened in surprise. He admitted that he had always thought so. Of all his familiars, the blonde one was the closest to perfection. He patted the servant on the head with delight. Renya was a little constrained and scared. She asked the brunette if he really wanted to arrange a wedding. Beldemer tensed up. He looked intently at his interlocutor. He asked why she seemed dissatisfied to him. Even when the brunette said that he would like to officially become her husband, he noticed that the girl did not look happy. The brunette thought about what to answer. Suddenly the girl looked up at the two young men and laughed. She admitted that it happened because it all happened so suddenly. Shapiro asked permission to schedule the ceremony for tomorrow. The brunette did not agree. Blood flowed from the servant's tender ears from her scream. Beldemer tensed up and looked at the girl intently. He asked why the girl refused. The brunette tried to come up with a reason, and then the perfect idea came to her mind. As a bride, she must wear a wedding dress that would be hard to come by if they were to have a ceremony. The young woman explained that she could not appear before Beldemer at their wedding in these rags. She wanted to have a banquet, and to choose a place for the ceremony. Renya wanted to hold the wedding in a very quiet place, for example, on an uninhabited beach. And she needs flower arrangements, and also invite witnesses and find a priest who can tie them in marriage. The brunette chuckled knowingly. Beldemer thought about it. He decided that it would be better if he tried to understand what the person who made the wish wanted. The time spent outside of this statue turned out not to be so bad. The young man agreed to do as Renya wanted. The young lady talked about how organizing a wedding is a very difficult task. The girl sincerely thanked her newly made groom. Her face turned pink with pleasure. Renya decided that she would definitely have a wonderful wedding. She thought that she was simply doomed to marry a second time. Meanwhile, the lady's maid found the place where Miss Freya lived. A wooden house was located in a circle of large fir trees. The girl hid behind the tree trunks. She looked around the area with surprise and caution. The lady asked to find Freya. The rival lived with her relatives 3 months ago. Why shouldn't the maid check? Was she with them now? The maid sometimes did not understand her mistress. Wasn't it good that Freya had disappeared? The girl knocked on the door, asked if anyone was home. Suddenly, she heard a voice and turned around. Behind her stood an old man with a cane. He told the girl that no one lived in this house. There used to be a lonely old man living there. He died a year ago. Annie heard that a whole family lived there. Maybe someone moved in. She asked when the old man died. Grandfather thought about it. He tried to remember if there was anything similar. He said that he didn't remember anything like that. He said that after the death of that old man, this house stood empty. Annie was surprised and confused. The girl did not understand how this could happen. The last rays of sunlight glided across the brickwork of the majestic mansion. Words of apology were heard in one of the rooms of the estate. Freya stood before her masters with tears in her eyes. The maid asked for forgiveness for the inconvenience she had caused by her sudden disappearance. Renya sipped her tea and watched her rival thoughtfully. The young woman wondered if she should do anything. Edwin was irritated. He stopped Freya abruptly, said she could go. But the lord's wife interrupted him, asked him to wait. Both the red-haired maid and Lord Lepore were surprised by the girl's behavior. The young lady reassured Freya, said that everything was fine. She carefully placed the cup with unfinished tea on the saucer. She admitted that she was glad to see the maid back. Renya looked at the young men intently and announced that she had something to say to both of them. The blonde asked if his wife really wanted a divorce from him. Renya confirmed that her husband's words were right. The blonde grabbed his head in a desperate gesture and closed his eyes. He admitted that this was quite unexpected for him. Lady Lepore noted that now her husband could be with whomever he wanted. The blonde made excuses. As he had said before, there was nothing between him and the maid. The brunette lowered her gaze. Then she asked her husband to answer whether he loved her. Edwin remained thoughtfully silent. The young man admitted that in any case he did not agree to a divorce. At least not now. Renia tried to control herself. The girl did not understand why and asked the reason for his refusal. The blonde replied that his sister Mary was getting married soon, and he wanted to postpone talk of divorce until her ceremony. Renya stood up abruptly. She knew her husband was refusing to divorce her because he needed money for his sister's wedding. Again, it all came down to money. Renya didn't show it. She said it was very good. The girl understood that she couldn't object to anything for now. Suddenly, Lady Lepore turned to her rival. Freya stared at her mistress, uncomprehending. The maid bowed her head, feigning submission before her mistress. Freya was wary, not knowing what to expect from her rival. The red hair shimmered dully. Renya said that she was too strict with the maid. The red-haired rival froze in surprise. Mistrust was visible in her eyes. Lady Lepore knew it was too late, but she asked to accept her apology. She promised that she would not disturb them both again. The massive library door closed. The maid and the lord remained in the study among the high bookshelves. Lord Lepore frowned. His green eyes were clearly puzzled. Something had not gone according to his plan. Renya leaned her head against the wall panel. She was quietly banging her head against it. She was surprised at herself. Did she really say that? The young woman thought that this most likely happened because she was already dying. Sadness settled in the girl's eyes. The brunette leaned against the wall and quietly muttered that it wasn't as painful as she thought. Her eyes filled with tears. Suddenly, the girl heard a loud scream. Her maid was running towards her. The brunette jerked in fear. Annie let out a worried cry when she saw the lady's tears. Renya said she had something in her eye, but the maid said it didn't matter now. Annie was very excited. She said that her mistress would not believe her, or rather would not believe what she had learned. The brunette allowed the maid to tell. I asked the maid if Freya's story was a lie. The maid confirmed it. That's right. No one lived in the house where she said she grew up. Renya wondered, why did the red-haired maid lie about her past? Was it part of her rival's plan to seduce Edwin? Annie reminded about the stone that the lady stole along with the map, and which allowed her to make a wish. The brunette immediately asked what happened to it. The maid asked a reasonable question, why the red-haired girl hadn't looked for him. Renya tensed up and thought about it. Annie continued to think. Either Freya didn't know it was missing, or she knew who stole it. One of the two. There were no other options. Renya thought hard. The girl remembered that the stone disappeared after she made a wish. The young woman was sure that this meant only one thing. Now Freya did not have the stone. and she would not be able to make her wish. The young lady understood that Freya would definitely look for him. The brunette froze in fear, realizing the inevitability of the search. Suddenly, Renya sighed. She remembered that they had more important things to do. The maid asked what kind of things they had. The brunette laughed awkwardly. She didn't know how to confess to Annie. She had a hard time finding the words. The maid tensed up. She admitted that her mistress had scared her. Renya said that she thought she would soon go to the altar again. The faithful servant froze in fear, as if struck by lightning. Annie asked if the lady was going to walk down the aisle again. Was it going to be a wedding again? Mrs. Lepore nodded in agreement. The maid asked if Lady Lepore really wanted to end up behind bars. Her mistress tapped her finger on her head. The haunted house was drowning in the night darkness. The black holes of the windows merged with the shadows of the branches. The full moon was a full mistress in the starry sky. Renya walked down the path to the house. The girl understood that having two husbands was very difficult. She did not think that she could keep it a secret any longer. The brunette understood that she had to divorce Edwin as soon as possible. The girl did not know how to do it. Suddenly the young woman stopped. A figure dressed in a dark cloak with a hood was climbing over the high fence towards the house. The unexpected guest froze on top of the fence. As expected, he felt a certain force. Renya watched him and thought that it was a thief. The girl bravely called out to the stranger. The girl's voice reached the ears of the man sitting on the fence. The brunette noted that if she were in his place, she would not have stuck her nose in there. The girl peered intently at the stranger's figure. The guy jumped and landed softly on the pavement in front of Renya. The brunette asked why he was trying to get into someone else's house. The stranger took off his hood, laughed, asked why she thought he was climbing and why she cared. The guy asked his interlocutor if this wasn't the place where Beldemer lived. Renya was stunned. She was amazed how he knew about this. Stammering in surprise, the girl asked the stranger a question. She asked how he knew about it, and who he was. The stranger stood before the brunette. His mysterious smile radiated confidence. The silver clasps on his cloak gleamed dimly in the darkness of the night. The mysterious stranger grinned. He asked if the girl really wanted to know who he was. Renya moved closer to her interlocutor. The guy said his name was Chase. She laughed cheerfully and admitted that he was pursuing an ambitious magician. Renya wondered, what did it mean? Ambitious. Suddenly the girl guessed what they were talking about. She asked the stranger if he was a magician. The guy confirmed it. In turn, he asked why the interlocutor was interested in this. The brunette began to warm up her fists, preparing for a fight. The girl wanted to punish the one who summoned the ghost to this estate. She swung and wanted to hit the stranger who had done it. The young man suddenly jumped aside. The girl had almost no doubt that all this disgrace in the estate was caused by her new mysterious acquaintance. The young man sat on the fence. Chase admitted that he did it because he didn't have money for his own lab. The girl understood. Chase said the brunette had no idea how many sleepless nights his father had spent trying to keep the business afloat because of all the rumors. The boy was sure that he would never have encroached on this place if he had known that the estate belonged to the Coriolano Guild. Renya chuckled thoughtfully. She probably should have thanked Chase for letting her hide Beldemer here now. Renya decided to help the young man. In return, she wanted the guy to keep quiet about what was happening here. The brunette resolutely jumped to the ground. The girl admitted that she wanted people to continue to think that a ghost lived in the house. Chase was surprised. Was it possible that the girl wanted to do all this for him? Did the brunette really want to hide the fact that Beldemer lived here? Renya confirmed that this was exactly what she wanted. By the way, the girl decided to find out from her interlocutor what he knew about Beldemer. The young woman was holding a book in her hands. She was trying to read, sitting at a table in the room. Beldemer was lying on the bed next to her. He was also reading a book. The girl looked closely at the handsome man and recalled Chase's story. The young man was sure that the brunette was an outstanding magician. One could say that he founded the modern art of magic again. But one day he simply disappeared, leaving no trace or record of where he could be found. Renya thought that one day the brunette disappeared and turned into a statue that granted wishes. She wondered what the hell had happened to him. The brunette suddenly said that Renya could look at him as much as she wanted. It wouldn't change anything. The girl was surprised what he meant. Beldemer insisted that no matter how much the girl wanted it, she would not be able to share his bed until they became legal spouses. Renya was outraged by the interlocutor's conceit. What the hell was he talking about? The girl put the book down, agreed with him, said that she wanted to ask him something. Renya moved to the brunette's bed. She insisted that he tell her the truth. The young man agreed. The brunette thought that Beldamir could not have been turned into a statue just like that. He must have done something terrible. The girl did not know how to start the conversation. The brunette asked why his interlocutor felt so uncomfortable that she couldn't just ask a question. Renya was embarrassed. She looked at her interlocutor carefully. She tried to think of a question. She suddenly asked why she couldn't touch the brunette's body with her hand. The handsome man froze in surprise. Renya couldn't bring herself to ask the question. If only the guy knew how ashamed she was about it. The brunette sat up in bed. Beldamir sighed. It seemed to him that the brown-haired girl was obsessed with his body. The young lady laughed, noting that it was not quite like that. The brunette touched Renya's face. The girl blushed slightly. The guy wondered if his mere presence was not enough for her. The young man thought about it. Unexpectedly, he agreed. Renya was excited. The guy assured her that as his wife she had the right to know. The brunette sat up in bed. The girl stood in front of him waiting for an answer. Beldamir admitted that the reason the girl couldn't touch him. The brunette interrupted him impatiently. She wanted to find out the truth as quickly as possible. She expected the brunette to reveal the secret. Beldamir did not look at his interlocutor. The young man admitted that the reason was that he did not want it. Renya was shocked by the answer. She looked piercingly at her new-baked groom. The brunette was serious. He admitted that his mood was spoiled when someone touched him, and this prevented him from studying magic. He always avoided things that hindered him from advancing in his research. His confession made Renya sad. The girl said that she understood everything. Suddenly, a brilliant idea struck her. The girl noted that the guy was not currently doing research. The brunette sighed. He was sure that Renya wanted to touch him. He thought how natural it was that she wanted to embrace his body with her arms. The narcissistic magician reasoned that he now understood very well the desires of other people, as well as what lay behind the desire of the brunette to be his wife. The young man slammed shut the book he had been reading recently. He declared that he could not consent to being touched. The guy hoped that something could satisfy Renya. The girl stared at her interlocutor in anticipation. Suddenly, Beldamir began to slowly unbutton his snow-white shirt, revealing his perfect torso. The brunette tried to cover her face with her hands in embarrassment. Blood rushed to her cheeks. The girl shouted Beldamir's name. The young man bared his perfect body, which radiated strength and grace. The brunette graciously allowed the girl to touch him with her gaze. The young people did not notice how the door to the room quietly opened. They were completely absorbed in what was happening. Shapiro smiled radiantly. He was carrying an exquisite dinner to his beloved master. On the tray stood a bottle of wine and a glass. The familiar froze at what he saw. His eyes widened in shock to impossible sizes. It was as if he had been struck by lightning. His jaw dropped in mute amazement. Renya stared at the abs with embarrassment and involuntary admiration. The servant froze in shock in the doorway. Stuttering, he asked what they were doing. Late that evening in Lord Lepore's majestic mansion, the blonde man urged Freya to wait a little longer. The man said that he could not get a divorce yet due to certain circumstances. The young people sat in the library and talked. Freya asked if it was all about Lady Mary's wedding. The man denied her assumptions. He admitted that it was just an excuse he had chosen. The blonde nervously smoothed his hair. He said that there was another reason, but the man couldn't tell the maid about it now. The red-haired homewrecker meekly said that her lord was not obliged to explain everything to her. The girl smiled and said that he was not obliged to divorce either. Lord Lepore considered. Of all the people living here, Freya was the only one with whom he had anything in common. Just as he became part of this family for the money, she came here to pay off her father's debts. The only difference between them was that she had to work hard every day. That's why he wanted to protect her. The man couldn't let her efforts go to waste. He sat closer to the girl and gently took her hands in his. The young people looked at each other. The green-eyed handsome man decided to look for a suitable house for the girl. Since his wife agreed to free Freya from her duties, he suggested that the girl's family move in with her. The redhead smiled. She apologized for interrupting her lord. The girl turned away, hiding her eyes. She decided to stay here. Edwin warned her that her life here would be more difficult. She would have to constantly look back. Freya disagreed. She replied irritably that even if that was the case, she preferred to stay here. The girl confessed to her lord that her only wish was to be here with him. She felt that if she left now, she would never see him again. The blonde looked up at his interlocutor with delight. He whispered his beloved's name. If she really wanted it, then fine. The man agreed to stay here together. He hugged the girl tightly. The redhead felt constrained. She was nervous. The maid's eyes blazed with scarlet fire. The girl understood that this was dangerous. A few days later, the day of another wedding of Rania had arrived. The seashore was ready for the celebration. The night ceremony was expected under the starry sky. The path led to the altar under an airy canopy. The sea splashed nearby, creating a sense of unreality. Annie was worried about the strong wind on the beach. She asked the lady to watch her veil. Dressed in a snow-white wedding dress, the brunette thought that she had always been so unlucky when it came to weddings. The girl shared with her faithful servant that Edwin had frowned so much when she married him, and today the weather was not conducive to a celebration. The bride asked Annie not to call her my lady today. The brunette told everyone that the girl was from the guild. The maid promised to try to remember. Renya looked charming as a bride. Annie noticed her mistress's dress. She asked if this wasn't the dress the girl was wearing during her wedding with Edwin. The young woman hissed at Annie and asked the maid not to even mention such a thing. Quiet steps were heard nearby. Beldemer approached the brunette. He called the girl by name. Renya stared at the newly arrived groom in amazement and admiration. The girl could not take her rapturous gaze off him. The groom was wearing a dazzling white uniform with a gold pattern. The brooch on his tie seemed alive in the flickering light. The brunette asked if she was ready. Behind the newlyweds, Shapiro was not holding back his emotions. He was shouting that his master looked amazing. Annie noticed that the groom looked good. Renya wasn't surprised, looking at the brunette standing next to her. After all, he was such a handsome man that even a loincloth would suit him. The groom looked at Renya. A veil with floral patterns framed her silhouette. Her bare shoulders drew the eye, and a mysterious smile touched her lips. The brunette looked at his wife and thought that she was quite cute. Their glances were interrupted by the priest. The man suggested that they begin the ceremony, allowed the groom and the bride to approach the altar. The couple headed towards the priest. Two guests froze on the sides. Their faces expressed ambiguous feelings. Renya asked the groom if they should hold hands. The brunette glanced at her with displeasure. The girl remembered that Beldemer's mood worsened when someone touched him. The brunette suggested that they simply walk next to each other. Beldemer highly appreciated this wonderful idea. The young people moved slowly along the path. The air around them rang with tension. The wind behind the girl fluttered her weightless veil. The familiar was sobbing. He couldn't even imagine that the master would be engaged to someone like the brunette. Annie asked why the blonde was ruining the party with his tears. Shapiro glared angrily. The servant did not consider this a holiday, unless it was for the bride. The faithful maid was surprised. What was he saying? The young people approached the priest. A man in clerical vestments shouted at the guests who were fighting to stop. He demanded silence. The priest announced that they were gathered there to witness a sacred union and unite these man and woman in the bonds of lawful matrimony. The pastor slowly spoke the necessary words. The bride was nervous. She mentally hurried the minister of the church. She wanted everything to end quickly. Finally, the priest pronounced them husband and wife. He said that the groom could now kiss the bride. Renya's mouth dropped open in surprise. Her second husband stood there with an unyielding expression. He didn't even move. The brunette was nervous. Of course, kiss. He didn't even let Renya take his hand. She hurried the priest, told him to continue. The minister chuckled. He repeated the words about the kiss. Renya said to continue. The man insisted. A kiss is necessary to seal the union. The young woman was confused and embarrassed. What does it mean to fasten? The girl waved her hand, indicating that the priest should continue. The man coughed. He decided that it would be possible to count that the groom kissed the bride. Suddenly, the brunette's scream interrupted the ceremony. Familiar and Annie continued to fight on the seashore. Beldemer said that he was ready to kiss the bride. Renya raised a surprised glance at the brunette. She said that he was not obliged, but the young man insisted. The brunette was very serious. He said that the girl's wish must be fulfilled. He was worried that if this ceremony did not go as it should, the sea breeze played with the hem of the bride's dress. The groom's dress uniform ruffled. The couple stood under a silk canopy at the edge of the sea. Renya was scared. Would he really kiss her even if he didn't like being touched? She was worried that he would die after that. It was very stupid. The brunette turned to the girl and quietly said that he only needed to touch her lips. Beldemer suggested doing it quickly. The young man took the girl by her bare shoulders. He looked intently into her eyes. The man slowly leaned towards his chosen one's face for a kiss. The guests froze to the side. Their faces expressed a mixture of surprise and joy. The familiar was crying, saying it was impossible, asking why the master was doing this. Annie was delighted. She was embarrassed. It was so romantic. Renya froze in anticipation of the kiss. The girl closed her eyes. Her cheeks turned pink. The brunette looked at the girl and leaned closer to her lips. The bouquet slipped from the bride's hands and fell to the ground. Their lips touched. The people around watched the first kiss of the married couple with trepidation. The brunette kissed his new wife and thought that it was all very strange. He did not feel any hostility. Renya was so gentle and so airy. Her chestnut hair flowed softly from under her lace veil. The blush on her cheeks betrayed her excitement. Their kiss deepened and then lingered. The newlyweds enjoyed such an intimate moment as their first kiss. The priest coughed into his fist. The minister thought that the young men certainly did not look like those who were afraid of being touched. Annie was worried about the lady. She turned to the familiar. She asked if he was going to do anything. She noticed that the brunette was behaving like a complete pervert. Shapiro called out to his master. He asked why he was clinging to the girl so tightly. The kiss dragged on. The embrace did not loosen. The cold drops of water disturbed Renia and distracted her from the process. She looked at the sky and noticed that it had started to rain. Her newly made husband didn't like the fact that the brunette was distracted. He made some movement with his fingers and the rain stopped above them. Shapiro was amazed. He looked at his master with all his eyes. He noticed what he had just done. The familiar was delighted. Beldamir had just used magic to create a barrier. The maid was very surprised when she heard about magic. Shapiro was happy that his master's power had returned to him. He shouted that his master had finally regained his magic. The young people continued kissing. The newlyweds could not tear themselves away from each other. Two women in hooded cloaks poured out quite a few gold coins to the priest. They hoped that the pastor would keep the whole incident a secret. The man hid the money in his wallet. He told the woman not to worry. He couldn't do his job if he couldn't keep his mouth shut. The minister also pulled his hood over his head and admitted that he would remain silent. The two women watched him go silently. When the priest left, the women took off their hoods. Annie asked the lady if it was over. Renya hoped so. As the brunette understood, Beldamir was supposed to turn back into a statue as soon as her wish was fulfilled. And so the wedding took place. The girl wondered, did this mean that the brunette would now disappear from her life? Her sad thoughts were interrupted by someone's unfamiliar voice. An unknown man was addressing the lady impolitely. The women were hiding from the rain under an awning. Renya asked the stranger who he was. The man said it didn't matter at all. What was important was that he knew. The stranger smirked. He spoke like a commoner. He didn't even care how much money her family had. What mattered was that she had grabbed 2 husbands. This meant that the girl would have to sit in chains for 10 years, if her husbands found out about each other's existence. Renya asked, how much did he want? The extortionist named the sum of 50 coins. He promised that they would be in the calculation. He asked what she would say about this. Annie dissuaded the lady. Renya interrupted the maid, pulled the hood over her head, offered the extortionist to meet at the docks. At midnight, the blackmailer shouted after the girl that it would be worse for her if she didn't come. He threatened that in that case he would tell her husband everything about her in the pub. The 2 women hidden under their cloaks crept along in uneasy silence. Every step was filled with caution and tension. The maid looked around. Renya turned to the maid with instructions. She ordered the faithful servant to go and collect the gold. The rain was pouring outside the windows. The brunette was sitting on the sofa in the room and thinking about how wet it was. The young man remembered the kiss, revived the sensations, noticed at the same time it was soft. Beldamir was thoughtful. The image of his bride was in his eyes. The brunette thought that she was so beautiful. Romantic thoughts were interrupted by his familiar. The servant entered the room silently. He addressed the master. Shapiro asked if everything was okay with him. The brunette was so deep in his thoughts that he didn't hear what his servant was saying. The familiar admitted that it was very strange. His master was very sad and thoughtful. Agreed with the servant. It was very strange. Beldamir admitted that every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scarlet lips of his new wife. The familiar was surprised. He didn't mean that. The young man looked at his wrist. There was a sign with the number 50 glowing there. He asked the servant why the wish had not yet come true. The number hadn't changed, and the brunette hadn't turned back into a statue yet. The young man stared at his hand. Shapiro reminded him of his master's powers. The brunette was able to use his magic at the ceremony, but now it was gone again. Beldemar chuckled. The familiar admitted that while the master was imprisoned in the statue, he spent all his time studying human literature. Based on his research, Shapiro realized that most of the damned were freed from their curse by receiving true love's kiss. The brunette thought. He looked up at the servant. A perfect thought came into his head. The master and his servant understood each other without words. Shapiro was sure that Lady Renya's kiss was the only way for the master to use his magical powers. The brunette was excited. He thought for a long time and made a decision. The man knocked on the wooden door. When the brunette entered Renya's room, the girl was very surprised. She asked her newlywed husband if he hadn't returned to the temple yet. She asked if he had come to say goodbye. The man shook his head. He told Renya that her wish was probably still unfulfilled. The brunette was shocked. Could it really not be done? She looked at the young man in surprise. Just don't let him tell her that the reason was Edwin. The girl was afraid that Beldemar would turn into a statue again only when she divorced Edwin, and he became her only husband. Wait a second. It wasn't like she could lose them both. Well, the brunette thought she would end up a lonely prisoner in prison. The brunette reported another piece of news. He had lost the ability to use his power again. The girl was surprised to notice that it still worked. There must be some explanation. The brunette thought about it. She suggested that they think about it together. The thought that came to her mind struck Renya. She looked up at the brunette. What did he want to say? The young man supported her unspoken thought. He had come to the same conclusion. Beldemar was sure that his strength had returned because they had kissed. The brunette was crimson. Her eyes were wide open in surprise. The brunette brought his face closer to the girl's embarrassed face. He asked how about testing their theory. Renya was surprised and excited. What did he want to check? She clarified what the brunette meant, that her kiss could restore his strength. Beldemar confirmed. He believed that this was so. The young man looked intently at the brunette. Renya thought that it must have been incredibly hard for a mage like him not to be able to use his power. The brunette agreed with her. The girl decided that she had to help. He had kissed her before and tried to fulfill her wish. It was not worth mentioning that she herself was to blame for the failure. Looking at the brunette, the girl wanted to say that this did not mean that she wanted to kiss the young man again. Renya thought that nothing terrible would happen if they tried. Her newly made husband brought his face closer to hers, gently touched her face. The young woman sat on the couch clenching her fists. The girl was nervous. The brunette brought his face closer to her lips. Both were excited. Suddenly, with a sharp movement, Beldemar hugged the girl and pulled her towards him. The brunette did not take his piercing gaze off Renya. The brunette pressed her palm against her second husband's chest and asked him to stop. The brunette didn't understand what was going on. Renya kept him at a distance. She asked him what he was trying to do. After all, he had to know if the magic worked or not. The young man seemed to have just remembered it. He made a gesture with his hand. He wanted to close the window in the room. Nothing happened. The brunette was confused. He realized that it didn't work. Renya wondered why. After all, they kissed like last time. Suddenly it dawned on the brunette. She wasn't saying this because she had an ulterior motive, but the girl was embarrassed. The interlocutor listened to her attentively. Renya reminded that during the ceremony the brunette used magic not after their kiss, but during the kiss. The young man thought. He asked his interlocutor if they could try again. He approached the girl again. They kissed again. The girl reminded Beldemar that he should try using his magic. Without interrupting the embrace and the kiss itself, the young man snapped his finger. The window, which had been open until now, closed. Renya was right. The brunette realized that they had to do this every time he needed to use magic. Beldemar held the girl's face in his palms. Without taking his eyes off her, he looked into her eyes. Both were flushed after the kiss. The brunette admitted that this time he would try to use higher-order magic. Renya was excited. What higher-order magic were they talking about? Beldemar pointed to the drooping roses in the vase, said that he could make these wilted flowers bloom again. The girl had never seen such magic before. The brunette asked if the girl wanted this. Renya thought about it. She thought that throwing them away would be a waste. Besides, she was intrigued. The young woman said that perhaps they would kiss for the last time. Beldemar hugged the brunette and brought his lips closer to her face. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open. Annie entered, telling the lady about the gold. The faithful servant was confused and amazed by what she saw. Renya jumped up with a cry about the Almighty Lord and pushed the brunette away from her. At midnight, 2 female figures appeared on the docks. Annie noticed that it was so hot in the ladies' room. She asked if her mistress was sure she didn't need ice to cool down a bit. The brunette ordered the maid to stop teasing her. She asked if the maid had prepared what she had asked for. Annie confirmed it. She was holding a bag in her hands. Suddenly, they were called out. The blackmailer approached the 2 women. He asked if they had brought him his gold. Renya said they had. The stranger grinned. He said that she did the right thing. He was sure that for their family it was a drop in the ocean. Renya agreed with the extortionist. The young lady said that it was so. She folded her arms across her chest and said that it was all a loss, so she would prefer not to give him the money. The extortionist shouted at her. He advised her to consider that she had bought herself 2 men with this money. Renya looked down. She admitted that the blackmailer was most likely right. The extortionist then advised her not to dwell on it and reached for the bag with the money. Suddenly, the strong hands of 2 strong men grabbed and held the extortionist from behind, preventing him from taking the money. The bearded man in the hat picked up the bag. He guessed that it contained the entire amount as they had agreed. Renya assured him that she would not disappoint the captain. The extortionist was indignant and was breaking free from the secure hold. He was trying to understand what was happening. They were holding him tightly. Renya replied that she had taken the liberty of finding him a job. As the extortionist might have noticed, merchant ships were always short of sailors. She said that he would have wasted his life if he continued to blackmail people. The extortionist angrily shouted that the girl was just like her daddy. As the blackmailer saw, he taught the girl his tricks. 2 strong sailors pulled the stranger towards the ship. The man resisted, shouted that Renya was a witch, threatened that she would not get away with it. The brunette thought she had become more experienced in such games. Was it because she was married to 2 men? However, Renya was sure that it was no longer so important, because it was not so bad. Meanwhile, in the temple, the emptiness where the statue had been seemed ominous in the semi-darkness of the room. An oppressive silence pressed on the walls. The girl took a cautious step and stopped. She was surprised. She did not understand how this could happen. Freya held an ancient map in her hands. She looked at it carefully and did not understand what it all meant. The redhead looked around. The pedestal was empty. The girl didn't understand why there was nothing there. She was shaking slightly. Freya was amazed. There was no magical statue in the temple. The girl looked at the map again. She knew she was in the right place. A few days ago, she discovered that the map and stone she had obtained with such difficulty had disappeared. Freya looked for them in her bag but did not find them. It didn't take the girl long to figure out that Renya had kidnapped them. She remembered the mistress's apology, the admission that the lady had been too strict with her. And even though it was too late, she asked to accept her apology. Freya saw that the brunette had always been obsessed with Edwin, and when the lady behaved unusually, she got scared. She thought, not this. She immediately realized that it was Renya who stole the stone and the map. The maid was sure of it. She looked everywhere for the lost things, but did not find them. Unexpectedly, in one of the rooms, the loss was found. The stone and the map were lying in the chest of drawers in the mistress's room. Freya grinned triumphantly. She knew. She suspected it had been the brunette all along. But now, in the empty temple, the red-haired homewrecker fell to her knees in despair. The maid screamed indignantly. The fire of hatred blazed brightly in her eyes. She was outraged by Renya's actions. The brunette was still sleeping soundly in her bed when Beldemer entered her room early in the morning. He sat down silently on the edge of her bed. Renya stirred in her sleep. She muttered something quietly. She turned over onto her other side. The brunette looked at the sleeping young woman, tried to use his magic to close the window, snapped his fingers. The window was still open. The brunette was upset. Nothing had happened. As Beldemer had predicted, a kiss was the only way for him to use his magic. The young man looked at the sleeping brunette. He thought. He assumed that he had no other choice. Beldemer was confused by his discovery. It turned out that he had to touch the girl's lips every time he needed. The quiet voice of a young woman interrupted his thoughts. The brunette woke up and looked at Beldemer in surprise. The guy turned away. He asked if Renya was awake. The brunette asked what he was doing here. The girl's voice was hoarse from sleep. Her throat was dry. The narcissistic brunette said that when the girl woke up, she was probably surprised to see such a beautiful face. Renya jumped out of bed demanding water. Suddenly, a glass of water approached the confused girl through the air. Renya froze in bewilderment looking at this magic. Grabbing the glass with both hands, the girl asked how the brunette's magic had returned. The interlocutor thought about it. A minute ago, nothing had worked for him. Renya was delighted. She was glad that, as it seemed to her, they would no longer have to kiss. The brunette found it all strange. Beldemer made several movements with his hands towards the teapot, which stood on the chest of drawers. The kettle did not move. Renya squinted, watching the disobedient dishes. The young people were silent. Beldemer thought about it. He realized that it only worked under certain conditions. But the guy couldn't figure out exactly under what conditions. He remembered that he managed to shield himself from the rain when they kissed at the ceremony. The young magician was also able to bring wilted flowers back to life and bring water to the girl. Renya emptied the entire glass. The brunette was happy. The young man suggested something, asked Renya what spells she would like to see. The brunette was surprised by such a question. She wondered what she would like to see right now. Renya chuckled. She pointed to the empty glass and asked how about putting it back on the table. Beldemer was delighted with this task. He snapped his fingers and the glass, breaking out of the brunette's hands, floated through the air. Renya froze. The girl was afraid to make a sudden movement. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the empty dishes smoothly fall onto the table. The girl was genuinely happy. She asked the brunette if he had found out under what circumstances his magic worked. The man folded his arms across his chest. He said that if his theory was correct, it meant only one thing. He slowly approached the girl. The brunette gently touched his interlocutor's hair. He admitted that he could only use his magic to fulfill her wishes. At this time in the Coriolano Guild, Lord Edwin's personal servant was asking Freya where she had gone the night before. The girl walked quickly along the castle corridor. Without stopping or even turning her head, she answered that she had gone home. The footman asked why she was so late. The girl got angry. She asked Basil why he was running after her instead of being with his master. The servant called his master young Master Edwin. The girl reminded him that the lord was already married, so for the footman he was Master Edwin. The redhead asked when Basil would finally pull himself together. The footman was embarrassed. He stuttered and asked for forgiveness. Freya ordered the footman to disappear. She informed him that she had to clean Lady Renya's room. The redhead thought for a moment. She smiled sweetly and asked the footman to keep it a secret from Master Edwin that she had gone home again yesterday. Basil was delighted with the girl. His heart was jumping out of his chest. The young man promised to keep everything a secret. The elated footman went away. The red-haired maid was displeased. She thought, what an idiot. Freya slowly opened the door to her mistress's room and looked around. She noticed that the lady had not returned yet. She praised the Lord. The redhead was perplexed. She kept thinking about what could have happened to the statue. The girl opened the chest of drawers. If she took the stone, Renya would suspect her of its disappearance. She decided to leave her a fake. The maid held 2 identical red stones in her hands. Freya wondered whether the lady had made a wish or not yet. And if she had, what she had asked for. The malicious homewrecker didn't think that the lady had asked to stop loving Edwin. The girl grinned. Although it could have happened and she had wished for it. The girl smiled slyly. She thought that in any case it would be better for the lady not to get in her way. Renya ran quickly down the castle corridor. She had to hurry with the divorce. Her faithful maid asked again what the lady meant. The brunette grabbed her head in irritation. She hadn't even imagined that someone would be able to see their wedding on that beach. Not to mention everything else. Renya thought about it. She decided that her wish must come true so that Beldemer could be freed. The faithful maid remarked that even if Master Edwin agreed to the divorce, did the lady really think that her father would give his permission? The 2 women walked down the deserted corridor of the castle. Renya realized the gravity of the situation. She was sure that of course he wouldn't allow it. She asked him to remember how his parent behaved at his and Edwin's wedding. The father then addressed his son-in-law as his dear son. Annie wondered what the lady planned to do next. The brunette decided to make it so that her father would not find out anything. The maid doubted it. She did not believe that such a thing was possible. Renya swore in front of the maid to make all this possible, by any means necessary. The enraged brunette drummed her fingers on the table. She was in the office and talking to her father. She was outraged that her father could allow Edwin to do this. The man looked through the documents. He did not look up at his daughter. Coriolano confessed to his daughter that his son-in-law wanted to learn how to manage the guild. The brunette really hoped that her father had not said yes. But the girl's hopes were not fulfilled. The parent admitted that he allowed Edwin to do this. The girl was in a panic. She did not understand how this was possible. How could father do such a thing? Didn't he find it strange that a man who had never been interested in the guild would ask for such a thing? The man said that perhaps his son-in-law came to this idea when Renya asked him for a divorce. The brunette was embarrassed. She understood what her father was talking about. The man reminded her that he had said time and time again that there were ears here and near the walls. The father put the document aside and admitted that he had also given his son-in-law the key to the vault 3 months ago. Renya was shocked. The brunette thought that only she and her father should have had the key. The girl was furious. She asked why her father gave the key to Edwin without consulting her. Renya tore her hair out in despair. Why did her father do this to her? The man noticed that his daughter could not control her emotions again. The young woman slammed the door as she left the office. She screamed that her father had ruined everything. She asked why he had done this to her. Coriolano was left alone. The man was thinking. He did not understand how his daughter had come to such a conclusion. At this time, Renya was wondering why the hell it was so hard to get a divorce. The brunette was talking to the maid. The girl was curious about what Edwin was planning. Was he planning to destroy the guild? The maid objected cautiously. She suggested that perhaps her husband still had feelings for the lady. Renya was very angry. She noticed that if this was true, then her husband had feelings for the guild's money, and not for her. The brunette clutched her head in despair. She rocked back and forth on the bed. Money was the reason Edwin was putting off the divorce. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a small piece of paper that lay white on the floor near her dresser. The girl tensed. Renya reached out and picked up a piece of paper. Annie asked the lady what it was. The brunette thought about it. She admitted that it was a piece of paper that she had inserted between the shelves, so that if Freya found the stone, she would know about it. The young woman realized that her rival had finally figured out that it was she who had stolen it. Renya opened one of the boxes and looked at its contents. Annie was surprised to see that the stone was still inside. The maid expressed doubt. She asked the lady if the stone had not disappeared after she had made a wish. The young woman picked up the stone. She looked at it and said it was a fake. She ordered a copy and kept it here along with the map. If Freya didn't take it, then she was simply convinced that the brunette had stolen it. The faithful maid was puzzled as to why she had done so. The lady asked Annie when the red-haired rival had come to work for them. The maid was sure that the girl had come about 3 months ago. The young woman speculated that Freya had infiltrated their family, and Edwin had obtained the key to the vault. These events had occurred about 3 months ago. Renya thought for a moment and came to the conclusion that this was definitely not a coincidence. In the haunted house, the brunette looked thoughtfully out the window. The familiar asked the gentleman if he could find out what his master was thinking about. The handsome man did not hide his thoughts. He honestly admitted that he was thinking about Renya's desire. Until it was fulfilled, it turned out that the brunette could only use his powers for her benefit. The blonde considered this rather ridiculous. Shapiro felt it was wrong to be tied to one desire for so long. On the other hand, the familiar reminded the master of his magic. He asked what the master thought the problem was. The blonde recalled that the ceremony had taken place and they had even... Shapiro quickly changed the wording and said that they had demonstrated their consent to their union. In essence, his master and Lady Renya were now husband and wife. The brunette listened attentively to his servant and remained silent. He remembered his promise. He said that in light of how their acquaintance had turned out, he had promised to be a model husband for Renya. There was no way that he, Beldemer, could be anything less than perfect. The young man said he had one thought that he couldn't get out of his head. Shapiro wanted to know what the gentleman had thought. His master admitted that when he heard Renya's wish, he promised that he would be the ideal husband for her. At the same time, in the storage room of the Coriolano Guild, Rania was shocked. On the shelf stood an open carved box. The girl was excited. She grabbed the empty box. Renya didn't know what had been there before. The brunette could safely assume, based on the remaining imprint, that it was a precious stone. I suspected that perhaps this very stone served as payment for the wish in the temple. The girl paced nervously around the office. If her theory was correct, did that mean Freya had stolen the first stone from their vault? It was obvious that the rival had come here to steal the stone. But how did Freya even know about its existence? Renya wondered who could have told the red-haired maid about their family vault. Or that Edwin had a key. An unexpectedly unpleasant thought entered Renya's head. She did not want to believe that her husband and the red-haired homewrecker had been in cahoots from the very beginning. Renya was pacing nervously, wondering if it was possible that Edwin had learned of the stone first and had drawn the maid into his plan. The brunette sighed heavily. The girl's head began to hurt when she thought about it. Her thoughts were interrupted by her faithful maid. Annie informed her lady that a man unknown to her had come to see her. The maid relayed the visitor's words. He said that the girl would definitely understand when she heard that he had come to tell her about his research. The porcelain cup landed on the surface with a soft thud. There was an air of uncertainty. Renya decided to sum up everything she had heard. It turned out that Beldamar used forbidden magic to demonstrate his power. After that, he disappeared and was never seen or heard from again. The brunette asked Chase if that was all he could find out. The guy threw up his hands. He had to work hard to even find that information. Renya was thinking. Looking into space, the girl thought about forbidden magic. She asked her interlocutor what he thought it could be. Chase told her that there was one rule that everyone who studied the magical arts followed. The brunette became curious about what that rule was. Chase told his interlocutor this law. No magician should ever, under any circumstances, try to bring a person back from the dead. Long ago, when the voices of the gods could still be heard, Beldamar tried to push the boundaries of what was possible. The boy thought that if this was the boundary that separated mortals and gods, then whoever managed to cross it could become a god. He was sure of it. The power to overcome the limitations that the gods had placed on people was within him. The young man stood in a relaxed pose, his arms folded across his chest. He looked at one point. The servant asked his master if he was sure that everything would be all right. They both looked at the lifeless body that lay on the bed. The familiar noted that resurrecting the dead was against the will of the gods. Beldamar asked the servant if he hadn't seen how grief was killing the parents of this dead child. Did the familiar really not feel sorry for them at all? Beldamar justified his actions by saying he felt compassion for the boy's parents. The woman sobbed while holding the dead child in her arms. But the reality was this. Beldamar considered himself an outstanding magician who was equal to the gods. A mysterious pentagram was drawn on the floor. Magic filled the air around. Beldamar tried to revive the child. He ordered him to open his eyes. Magic was everywhere, filling every corner of space with its ancient power. The brunette was put on a child who was lying motionless on the bed. He was surprised that it didn't work. Suddenly, the dead man's hands shook. The child moved. Beldamar stared at the boy with all his eyes. He couldn't believe that everything had worked out. The wizard stuttered and asked the child if he had heard his voice. The brunette decided to carefully touch the boy's feet. The dead man replied that he had heard the magician. Beldamar was shocked by what had happened. He recoiled from the bed. There was fear in his eyes. It was no longer a boy sitting on the bed. Someone had entered the dead body. The one who was in the body said that he saw how Beldamar dared to break the ban. The brunette immediately realized that something was wrong. That voice. It couldn't belong to a child. Beldamar tried to object, said that it was definitely a success. God in the boy's body agreed, admitted that it was possible to say so. The brunette laughed. He looked at his hands. He was amazed that he could do it. The highest in the boy's body asked why the brunette dared to challenge him. Beldamar said that he did it out of pity for the child's parents. He admitted that they said their only wish was to get their son back, and the brunette couldn't refuse. The spirit in the boy's body was surprised. Could it really be true? He had no idea that Beldamar liked to fulfill the wishes of others. God thought about it and decided that it wouldn't be too much trouble for the brunette to fulfill a couple more wishes. He made some movement with his fingers and Beldamar turned into a magical statue. He ordered to try. The brunette sat thoughtfully with a book in his hand. Shapiro brought another stack of books. He said that these were all the volumes that the gentleman had requested. The brunette grinned sadly. He looked at the quantity. He noticed that there were quite a lot of them. Shapiro watched his master attentively. He thought that his master must read all these books. The servant noticed what book his master was holding in his hands. On the cover it said, "How to Become a Great Husband." The author of the book admitted that he saved his marriage with the help of advice from this book. Anyone could do that. The brunette sobbed. How sad it was. Beldamar was just trying to keep his promise. Besides, he had no idea how to be a good husband. All the selected books were on the same topic. Happy Wife, Happy Destiny, Marriage for Dummies, To Love and Be Loved, The Ideal Husband. The brunette read out another piece of advice from the book. It advised showing respect to your wife. The brunette agreed that you couldn't argue with that. The next phrase was about not having to communicate with other women. The young man thought about it. Wasn't that obvious? Suddenly he exclaimed joyfully. He saw points that were very important. The author of the book presented many indisputable arguments. The young man sat at the table with a pen in his hands and took notes. Respect your spouse. Always be discreet. Learn to cook well. Be gentle with your spouse. Do not communicate. Wake your wife up with a light kiss every morning. The pen flew across the paper. The brunette underlined the advice about waking up with a light kiss. He put a tick opposite. Mentally wished Renya to just wait. Renya felt an incomprehensible excitement. Her ears were burning. The girl was thinking, was someone really remembering her with an unkind word? The town square was crowded. The girl peered into the crowd. She wondered what all these people were doing here at such an hour. As Renya made her way through the crowd, she heard gossip and surprised exclamations. Everyone was wondering who could have left this thing there. People speculated that perhaps it was the work of an unknown sculptor who was hungry for fame. Renya made her way through the crowd of onlookers with great difficulty. The girl looked up, and what she saw made her freeze in place. The brunette was stunned. She opened her mouth in surprise. The girl did not understand what was happening. A pedestal towered in front of her. On a pedestal in the middle of a busy street stood a sculpture of a half-naked young man. Renya wondered why the statue was there.
A loud, girlish scream broke the silence of the night. The young lady, barely catching her breath, reported that they had a huge problem. Shapiro was slowly drying the dishes. The servant asked Lady Renya what it consisted of. The brunette, stuttering, pointed somewhere with her finger. The girl was talking about the central square. The wizard's familiar replied that the central square was on the other side. The interlocutor flared up. She had not asked where this square was. The blonde assumed that in that case, Renya had already seen the master's statue. The girl was surprised that the servant already knew about it. The familiar confirmed, admitted that it was he who had installed it as a wedding gift for both of them. Renya froze in shock. The girl worriedly asked the service whether it was normal for the statue to be standing where people could see it. The blonde said that it would be a problem if the master was inside the statue. The servant asked in surprise if there were people gathering around the sculpture. The familiar sobbed with delight. He said decisively that it was wonderful. He knew that Mr. Beldemer would be able to impress mortals. Shapiro began to spin around in place. He shouted requests into space for people to sing the name of his magnificent and majestic master. Rania asked Beldemer if he was not concerned about the statue of him that was erected in the central square. The man did not object. The brunette wondered if the young man was really not bothered by the fact that even strangers were looking at him. The wizard happily admitted that he was used to this kind of attention from people. Renya thought about it. There was a danger that if the statue of the magician stood in the central square, then most likely someone would recognize him. Beldemer remembered one of the rules. A good husband should be gentle with his wife. The man wondered what exactly he was supposed to do now. The young lady said decisively that it would be better if she moved the statue to another place. Beldemer turned to the girl and asked if she was really so worried about other people looking at the statue. The brunette tried to justify herself. The girl assured her interlocutor that this was not the reason at all. Beldemer gently touched the girl's cheek. He asked Renya not to worry about trifles. He reminded her that she was the only one who could have him. Unexpectedly, the brunette hugged Renya tightly and confessed his hopes that the girl had a good day. The brunette blushed in surprise and embarrassment. The girl did not understand what the wizard was doing at that moment. The brunette held Renya tightly to herself. The handsome man thought that the point, being gentle with her, had been fulfilled. The wizard was already thinking about the next point. The man looked intently into the eyes of his interlocutor. He admitted that he would very much like to get to know the girl. Beldemer asked ingratiatingly how long they would live apart. Renia froze at the unexpected question. The wizard reminded that, now that they were officially married, he would not mind if the brunette stayed here with him. Renya was confused and excited by this proposal. The magician continued that he wanted her to start this from this evening. Beldemer held the girl tightly in his arms. The young man suggested that Renya sleep in the same bed from now on. In the darkness of the bedroom, they lay under the same blanket. The young people turned away from each other. Their tense backs said more than words could. The young lady thought that she had never slept in the same bed with Edwin before. The girl thought that it was very uncomfortable for her. Beldemer asked if the girl was asleep. Renya asked what he wanted. The wizard didn't want anything. He just wanted to wish the girl good night. In response, Renia also wished the brunette good night. The young man sincerely thanked the girl. Beldemer refreshed his memory on one of the rules, that a good husband should wake his wife up with a kiss every morning. The brunette remembered his secret list. He thought that everything was going great, and according to the plan. Morning came unnoticed. Beldemare suddenly opened his eyes, remembering the obligatory morning kiss. Renaya pulled herself up contentedly on her side of the bed. The girl admitted that she felt incredibly rested. The young man sadly realized that he was late with the morning kisses to wake up his wife. The brunette asked if Beldemare had slept well. The brunette was surprised by the girl's early rise. The girl happily explained that she had to get up early to get everything done on time. The brunette, as it turned out, forgot to take this into account. The interlocutor did not understand what he meant. Beldemare asked not to pay attention to his words. Renaya was about to leave the estate. She promised Beldemare that she would return later. The brunette followed the girl. The young man asked his wife to wait a second. Standing in the doorway, Renya looked back at the brunette. Beldemare gently embraced the young beauty and whispered in her ear a wish for a good day. The wizard asked Renya to return home early. The young lady was embarrassed by the wizard's behavior. She gently pushed the young man away from her and promised to return early. Renya ran away quickly. Her footsteps died away in the hallway. The wizard froze for a moment, then his voice cut through the silence, calling for his faithful familiar. The servant came at the master's call. Beldemare reported that one point of the plan to wake up Renya with a kiss had failed. He suggested moving on to the next stage. A drop of sweat ran down the brunette's cheek. Anxiety appeared in his eyes. The wizard thought that being a good husband was not as easy as he had previously thought. The girl ran along the wide pavement. The young lady did not understand what had happened to Beldemare yesterday. Was it because they were newlyweds? Renya remembered with fear that from the very day of their wedding, the wizard had hugged her at every opportunity. The young lady wondered if it could be because Beldemare had enjoyed their kiss so much. Renia was in the clouds. She wondered if this was really his first kiss. She admitted to herself that she had never kissed like that before either. The brunette mentally tried to stop the flow of unnecessary thoughts. The girl understood that now was not the time to think about it. The girl walked forward purposefully. The heels of her shoes clicked loudly on the pavement. She understood that she had a lot to do today. As she walked quickly along the cobbled street, Renaya thought sadly that living with two husbands was quite hard work. Renya ordered her servants to move the statue to her palace. The girl asked Chase to continue searching for information about her second husband. The brunette drank tea slowly. She hoped that maybe today she would see him earlier. Suddenly, she was interrupted by the voice of the red-haired maid. Freya's smile was not genuine. The homewrecker said that there was something she wanted to talk to the lady about. The maid tried to be polite. She poured hot tea into the lady's cup and offered her to enjoy the drink. Renya forced a smile, asking what the redhead wanted to talk to her about. The brunette was perplexed as to why Edwin forced his mistress to continue working here. The young lady suspected that her rival did not take the stone from her room because she knew it was a fake. The young lady wondered if it was possible that she had no need for the stone yet. The cunning maid said that she herself asked to be left in the palace. The maid wondered if Renya had made a wish, or if all her efforts had been in vain, like Freya's. Renya put her cup down on the saucer. She asked if the maid really meant here, in the sense of the brunette's family. The homewrecker confirmed the lady's guess. She said that if it were possible, she would like to ask the mistress to make her personal servant. The two girls glared at each other. Renya suspected that the vile homewrecker still had unfinished business here. I remembered the wise saying that you should keep your friends close, and your enemies even closer. The brunette intertwined her fingers and squinted at her interlocutor. The young lady asked if Freya really wanted to serve her. Smiling falsely, the maid declared that the lady had understood her correctly. She pretended to say that the mistress was very dear to her. The brunette laughed sincerely. The girl said that she had no idea about it, because she thought that the redhead was dear to Edwin. Freya falsely assured that she respected Master Edwin, but she treasured her mistress more than anyone else. The brunette, smiling to herself, said that she appreciated it, but her maid was Annie. The young lady understood that the homewrecker wanted to spy on her. She decided to refuse the request of the vile maid. The red-haired maid replied that she understood everything. She admitted that she was very sorry. The maid rose from her seat and asked the lady to be sure to tell her if the mistress decided to change her mind. Renaya promised to do so. The brunette had previously thought that Freya was a nice girl, but now it became obvious to her that she was rotten to the core. She wondered if Edwin had no idea of his mistress's true nature. Or maybe he knew and loved Freya just like that. The girl grabbed her head. Seeing the connection that had arisen between them, she realized that such a thing was possible. Her torment was interrupted by the maid. Annie turned to the lady sheepishly, timidly admitted that she would like to talk about the statue. The mistress asked what had happened to her. The maid learned that she belonged to some lord. He had his eye on her. Rania jumped up from the cozy sofa. The girl was stunned by the news. She asked how it all happened. Late in the evening, while at the estate, Rania said that, in the end, she would not be able to transport the statue. The girl did not understand how, among so many people, the statue ended up in the greedy clutches of this particular lord. The greedy gentleman was practically licking the sculpture. He grunted and muttered that it was his statue entirely and completely. The girl was worried about what would happen if this lord found out that it was Beldomere. Renya realized that she couldn't just go to the nobleman and say that the statue belonged to her. The girl bit her nails nervously. She watched with irritation as her familiar hummed to himself while putting things away. The young lady got angry. She believed that this familiar was to blame for everything. The girl looked after the blonde with annoyance. Shapiro felt the girl's angry gaze on his back. The familiar, looking innocent, asked the lady what had happened. The brunette turned away from the familiar, said that nothing had happened, asked where Beldomere was. The blonde was extremely glad that the young lady had finally asked about it. Shapiro pointed to the next door and said that his beloved gentleman was in the kitchen. The girl followed the aroma. It smelled very nice. The brunette quietly called Beldomere. Opening the kitchen door, the girl froze, seeing the brunette. Renya's eyes widened. Her breath caught. The young lady blushed with embarrassment. A brunette was showing off his bare, sculpted torso in the kitchen in a snow-white apron. Beldomere noticed that the girl had returned earlier than he had expected. The young lady began to stutter from embarrassment. The girl timidly asked Beldomere where his shirt was. The magician admitted that he was afraid of getting his clothes dirty. He asked his interlocutor if that was really a problem. Renya looked at the beautifully built young man with admiration. She covered her face with her hands in embarrassment. She didn't think it was a problem. Suddenly, a spoon filled to the brim with what the brunette was cooking appeared in her mouth. The girl looked at Beldomere in surprise. The wizard watched his wife closely. The young man asked if she wanted to try what he had prepared. Renya agreed without hesitation. In a moment, the spoon the brunette was holding in his hands was emptied and licked. The brunette was worried. His cheeks were covered with a scarlet blush. The young man asked if the girl liked it, and if it was tasty. Renya closed her eyes in admiration. The girl enthusiastically admitted that it was amazing. The brunette was surprised and glad that Renya liked it. He was very worried. After all, it was his first cooked dish. Looking around, Renya noticed that the brunette usually did not cook. She thought that he entrusted the cooking to Shapiro. Beldomere confirmed her suspicions. The wizard confessed that today was the day he wanted to cook something for her. The girl stared at the brunette in amazement. Beldomere asked if she remembered his promise that he would be a good husband to her. Of course, Renia remembered these words. The girl confessed this to her husband. Beldomere approached the brunette and asked if she wanted more. Embarrassed and stuttering, Renia agreed, on the condition that he was not against it. The brunette was delighted. But first, he admitted that he had to meet his wife properly. And first, the brunette reached for Renya's lips. Looking intently into her eyes, he gently touched her cheek. Suddenly, they were interrupted by Shapiro's delighted cry. The blonde, unabashed, quickly ate straight from the pot. Shapiro was deeply moved. He confidently declared that there was nothing that his beloved master could not do. The brunette chuckled and told Shapiro it was just a pot of stew. The blonde thought that he must have died and gone to heaven. The servant praised his master, said it was anything but a roast, said Beldomere could have become a chef. The familiar admitted that he was more than sure that people would come from all over the world just to try his master's dishes. Renya was angry. She watched the stupid conversation. The brunette noticed that this idiot was very polite today. The young lady noticed the sly look the blonde gave her. She suddenly realized that Shapiro had interrupted her and the wizard on purpose. The next night, Renya found herself in bed with the mage again. Beldemer wanted to know what had happened in the guild today. The brunette was surprised by the question. The brunette asked if maybe someone had been rude to Renya, or maybe the work had been especially hard today. Beldemer was doing his other duty as a good husband. The young man's notes indicated that a good husband needs to ask his wife how her day went and listen to her carefully. The brunette opened her mouth in surprise. The magician was happy. It seemed to him that it worked. Renya was so surprised by his concern that she did not utter a word. Lost in thought, the brunette reflected on the fact that, in fact, today one of the maids tried to steal a precious stone from her. Our heroine didn't understand whether she should use this opportunity to find out how that stone fulfilled wishes. Beldemer did not understand what crystal was being discussed. The young man asked his interlocutor again what was being discussed. Renya was sure that the mage knew it. It was a red stone that she used to summon the mage. The stone belonged to the guild. When Renya made a wish, the stone disappeared. The brunette assumed that her rival hoped that the stone was somewhere in the guild. The girl suspected that this was the reason why the red-haired maid tried to find this crystal and steal it. Beldemer thought for a moment. The young man assumed that his wife was talking about the blood sapphire. The brunette was surprised by such a name for the jewel. Beldemer explained that these were frozen drops of his blood. Only when the magician absorbed such a stone, life returned to him again. The young man admitted that only at that moment did his heart begin to beat. Renya wondered if this meant that no one would be able to obtain such a stone now that Beldemer had returned to his human form. The brunette chuckled. The young man moved closer to his wife. He asked if she really wanted to find another bloody sapphire. The young lady sighed heavily. The girl apologized and sincerely admitted that she had found it tempting. The brunette tenderly touched Renya's cheek, carefully touched her hair, assured that this stone would look great on her neck as a necklace. After these words, the man reached for his wife's lips. The young people's breathing was interrupted in anticipation. Unexpectedly, such an intimate moment was interrupted by a tactless wish for a good evening. The young people recoiled from each other. Shapiro appeared like a jack-in-the-box. The blonde said he had come to prepare their room for bed. The familiar was numerous. He asked unnecessary questions. He wondered if they wanted the curtains drawn, or if it would be better to gather them up. He asked if it was possible to leave them slightly loose, as usual. He offered a glass of wine for the night. The brunette was shocked by such unceremonious behavior of the servant. Shapiro mockingly offered the lady a glass of wine. Renya's nerves were on edge. She thought of Beldemir's familiar as a scoundrel. In the mansion, Chase was genuinely surprised by what was said. The guy asked if the brunette had any desire to teach her familiar a lesson. Chase sighed heavily and asked fearfully if the girl had really created a familiar. The brunette calmed her interlocutor. She explained that Shapiro belonged to a magician. Chase couldn't understand why the girl wanted to teach this servant a lesson. The brunette put the cup on the porcelain saucer. Her answer was laconic. Because. Renya suspected that this unceremonious familiar stood between her and her family happiness. The girl remembered this morning. Her husband was gently touching the brunette's hair. The young man whispered that it was time for the girl to get up and get ready for a new day. The brunette stretched his whole body towards his wife. The wizard said that it was the duty of every good husband to wake his wife with a tender kiss. Renya, embarrassed, asked if it was really just one kiss. The brunette stared at his interlocutor in surprise. Beldemer, after thinking for a moment, said that this rule did not provide for restrictions. He stretched his lips to the girl's lips. The intimate silence of the bedroom was broken by the loud sound of the door opening. It was followed by a loud wish of good morning. Shapiro was delightedly telling us that the weather today was simply wonderful. Our heroine was quietly seething with anger. Such moments began to repeat themselves quite often. This happened not only in the morning. Shapiro tried to squeeze between the young people. He said that he felt cozy and warm here. In moments when the couple tried to be alone, the familiar was intrusive. The blonde begged the young people to wait for him. Renya was seething with indignation. She admitted that she wanted to teach this scoundrel a few lessons in good manners, no matter what it cost her. Chase recalled the words about family happiness. He asked again if the girl really wanted to say that she married Beldamere. Horror was splashing in the interlocutor's eyes. The young man knew for sure that his interlocutor already had a husband. The brunette covered her mouth with her hand in excitement. The girl hastened to remind him that she had told her interlocutor that she would soon get a divorce. The young lady assured Chase that she would not want this familiar to stand between her and the wizard when they began living together. Chase did not share his interlocutor's delight. He was outraged and did not understand what the girl was thinking when she married Beldamere. Finally, Chase made a difficult decision. The young man asked permission to clarify something. The boy said that it was extremely difficult to get rid of a familiar, especially if it was created by a mage who had such power as Beldamere. Renya froze, watching her interlocutor. She admitted that she did not want to get rid of him at all. All our heroine needed was to teach the impudent and unceremonious familiar a lesson. Shapiro insistently offered to help his master. The brunette was cutting vegetables. The magician replied that he should probably do it himself. Beldamere recalled that this morning he was finally able to wake up Renia with a kiss. The young man was sure that it was only a matter of time before he became a model husband. The blonde said that his master was already the husband any girl could only dream of. The servant did not understand why the wish had not yet come true. Beldamere reported that this was all because, no doubt, there were things the wizard was still not good enough at. Shapiro was displeased. The blonde was perplexed as to why his beloved master had fallen into the hands of such an ungrateful woman. The restless servant reflected on the fact that his master, by his very existence, confirmed that he was an ideal husband. The brunette was cutting vegetables with a sharp knife. The man was silent. Suddenly, Shapiro heard the brunette's request to come to her for a minute. The blonde was angry. The familiar was perplexed. He thought with displeasure how it happened that such a capricious mortal could become his master's wife. The familiar found himself in the courtyard of the estate. Twilight swallowed everything around. The servant saw Lady Renya with a broom in her hands and quickly headed towards her. The blonde asked dismissively if the girl thought that now was not the best time to clear the leaves. He asked me to tell him what the girl was doing on the street right after she came home from work. Renya swung her broom rhythmically. Dry leaves flew from side to side. The girl asked to repeat. She had not heard her familiar well. Trying to hide a sly smile, the young lady asked her familiar to come a little closer. The blonde was irritated. Shapiro was perplexed as to how it could be that the girl at such a young age already had problems with her hearing. With a quick, decisive step, the blonde headed towards Lady Renya. Another step, and the blonde hung there, perplexed. With his leg raised in the air, the blonde screamed with horror in his eyes. He claimed that it was impossible. Shapiro saw the seal that stole the familiar's magical power. The girl stood motionless, without raising her head. Renya expressed insincere sympathy. The girl admitted to herself that the impudent blonde needed only to take one more step, and she would get what she wanted. Flames blazed in her eyes. Shapiro stared at the girl in fear. The blonde really wanted to know who told Renya about this magic. The girl looked at the mischievous familiar with a smile. She said that it shouldn't have bothered him. The brunette came closer to her familiar. She noticed that the blonde should be worried about something else now. The girl reminded that Beldamere could only use his magic for her. She said that if the blonde lost his powers, the only one who could help him was her. The familiar's eyes filled with tears. Surprised, he asked Lady Renya what he had done to deserve such treatment. Our heroine blamed the blonde for the fact that she could not enjoy her honeymoon because the familiar was always hanging around Beldamere. Shapiro was outraged because the magician was his master. The blonde admitted that it was the duty of a familiar to always be near him. Renya replied that, whatever the case, the servant had gone too far. The girl asked the familiar to stop following Beldamere around. Shapiro's eyes widened in surprise when the girl advised him to try living his own life. Shapiro froze in confusion. The blonde didn't understand what it meant to live his own life. Was a familiar allowed to do that? In the morning, the wizard wished Renya a good day. He asked his wife not to stay late at work and to come home early. The brunette admitted that he was going to cook her favorite tomato soup today. The girl, with a gentle smile, promised that she would try to fulfill his request. The brunette leaned towards his wife and snatched a farewell kiss from her lips. The familiar watched the young people from the side. Shapiro decided to intervene and disturb his master, but the brunette's menacing gaze did not allow him to finish his sentence. The girl menacingly showed the blonde her fist. Mentally, Renya broadcasted that he should think about her words, so that he would start living his own life. Beldimmer stared at the servant in bewilderment. The blonde replied that it didn't matter anymore. He asked them to enjoy each other. After all, they weren't alone. Renya smiled happily. The young people again, tenderly, clung to each other. The girl was glad that Shapiro had taken her advice. At the Lepore mansion, the girl asked Edwin in confusion if he really wanted to have dinner together. The blonde was sitting at the table, looking through some papers. He confirmed his desire and noted that he would like to discuss something with her. Renia thought with horror that she had already arranged to have dinner with Beldimmer that day. Edwin asked if she was busy today, as usual. The man noticed that the brunette had often been absent from home lately. Renia answered negatively and headed out of the office, promising to meet for dinner. At the door, looking back at Edwin, the brunette thought that maybe it was all for the best, decided she had to find out what her first husband was working so hard on. The blonde man spent his days going through the guild's books. Suddenly, the girl had a great idea. She called Edwin and told him that she was dying of hunger. She asked him to go to the canteen right now. The blonde looked questioningly at his wife. He wondered if she was sure about that. After all, it was only 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Renya thought about how Edwin didn't even realize how much she wanted tomato soup. She asked the blonde, who said they couldn't have dinner earlier. The married couple sat across from each other at a long table. Both were silent. The girl had not even touched her food. Edwin was surprised to ask why his wife had not eaten. Did she not like the taste of the food? The brunette looked at the man with fear. She admitted that she had lost her appetite. The blonde was surprised. After all, she had recently said that she was dying of hunger. Renya smiled. She had just finished her lunch. The girl admitted that she was so hungry that she ate all the cookies. Edwin stared at the girl, uncomprehending. The young man was surprised when she managed to do this. Renya coughed and asked not to bring up the topic again. She asked what they were supposed to talk about. The man put down his utensils and noticed what the girl had said about the two of them. He assumed that Renya also wanted to discuss something with him. A heavy silence hung in the room. No one present was in a hurry to start a conversation. Renya was the first to decide. She asked what the blonde was looking for in the accounting books. He had never been eager to get involved in the guild's affairs before. Edwin replied that the Lord wanted to know how things were going between them. He stated that he was simply trying to make sure that everything was okay. The brunette was surprised. After all, her husband had never made account for the Lord. Edwin admitted that this was why they were losing money. He could never get the report right. The man admitted that he wanted to be prepared to answer any question the Lord might ask. Renya nodded. She said that now everything became clear to her. The girl still had many questions for the blonde, but there was almost no time left. The young lady was already dreaming about the soup that Beldimmer would give her. Edwin's words brought her out of her dreamy state. The man was addressing Renya. He said that it was now his turn to ask her a question. Edwin looked at his interlocutor intently. He asked why she had decided to get a divorce so suddenly. Renya laughed nervously. The girl admitted that she thought she had already explained everything to the blonde. Edwin was not satisfied with this answer. The man honestly admitted that he did not understand why she needed a divorce. Until recently, the girl was not ready to let him leave the estate alone. The memories came flooding back to the girl, making Renya shudder at what she had done. The horror that the brunette experienced in her first life made her forget all the little good that was between them. The girl laughed artificially and said that she was just very worried about him. Edwin was serious. The man asked tensely that perhaps there was another reason, one that the girl could not tell him about. The blonde man peered at Renya. The brunette was nervous. The girl was worried that Edwin could have found out the truth. Renya tried to calm down. The girl couldn't show it. She answered her husband negatively, explained that she was just tired. The young lady reasoned that, after all, Edwin was an aristocrat, and she was a commoner. This meant that his affair did not justify her relationship with Beldimmer. The brunette understood that even if it was unfair, she had no other choice. Clenching her hands into fists, the girl asked her husband's opinion. Didn't it seem to him that after 3 years of their marriage, they were already quite tired of each other? Rania said that even couples who marry for love eventually break up, and there was never any love between them. The young lord was surprised by his wife's words. The girl tried to explain to Edwin that she was simply tired of it. The girl admitted that this was the only reason she asked for a divorce. A grand feast was laid out in a cozy house that belonged to the guild. Renya rubbed her hands in anticipation. She admitted that everything looked so delicious. Even though the brunette ate almost nothing during dinner with Edwin, she understood that she was about to burst. The girl felt like her stomach was about to explode. Her stomach was at its limit and screaming, "Help!" Beldemer peered into the girl's face. He noticed that she looked depressed. The magician asked if something had happened at work. The brunette shuddered at his unexpected words. Renya plastered a smile on her face and replied that everything was fine. The girl said that she just had to run to make it to dinner. Beldemer was pleased with the girl's answer. He asked if his wife really wanted to try his tomato soup so much. The wizard thought the girl looked very hungry. Renya laughed, confirmed that she was very hungry. The young lady understood that if she didn't eat anything, her interlocutor would definitely suspect something. The girl reached for one of the dishes, begging her tummy to hold on a little longer. Beldemer watched the girl eat with affection. He asked if she liked it. Renya reported that it was simply delicious. Shapiro entered the room solemnly, holding huge cakes in his hands. The brunette hoped that the girl would be completely delighted by this. Our heroine was overcome with panic. The girl looked at the variety of dishes on the table and understood that she would not be able to eat anything else. Renya pressed her lips tightly together and raised her hand to her mouth, holding back the urge to vomit. The brunette stared at the girl, uncomprehending. The stomach made loud sounds. The brunette jumped out from behind the table like a bullet. Beldemer watched the girl run away. He didn't understand anything. The young man stood confusedly in front of the generously laid table. Renya was in the toilet. She was feeling sick. Beldemer broke out in a cold sweat. He didn't understand why this had happened. After all, he had personally verified that all the products were fresh. The young man was upset. The brunette thought that most likely his dishes were not to Renaya's taste. The brunette grabbed his head. The impossible had happened. The magician was perplexed, because this could not have happened to him, to the great Beldemer. Or it could. The young man thought that perhaps all this time the girl had only been pretending to adore his dish. His sorrowful torment was interrupted by Shapiro. The blonde asked the gentleman if everything was okay with him. The brunette asked about Renya's health. He hoped that the girl had not said that she would never touch his dish again in her life. The familiar stared at the master in surprise and asked what he meant. The blonde said that Lady Renya simply had an upset stomach. That's all. The girl was lying on the bed at the time, breathing heavily. The brunette was covered in a sticky cold sweat. The girl felt bad. She thought she would die. Renya lightly stroked her belly. She was worried that her husband must have been in shock. After all, the brunette had prepared a wonderful dinner for her. Beldemer suddenly entered the room. The brunette stared at Renia. The girl sat up in bed, smiling at her husband. The wizard asked why the girl felt ill. Did she really not like their dinner that much? The girl shook her head. The brunette thought that if there was one thing she didn't like, it was her conversation with Edwin. Renya replied that she had simply eaten too quickly. After all, she had not had a chance to have a snack all day. Beldemer was surprised. He asked if the guild hadn't provided the girl with lunch. The brunette admitted that that wasn't the case. The girl said that she was really looking forward to trying his tomato soup. She wanted to be sure that it would fit in her. The brunette was worried. She thought that Beldemer might doubt her words. The brunette expressed hope that this would not happen in the future. The girl clarified what he meant. The wizard said that the girl should eat at work. They could always have dinner later. He said that he didn't want the brunette to torment herself. The magician was more upset by the thought of his wife forcing herself to starve for him than he would have been if she had not liked the food he had prepared. The brunette noticed that the girl was lightly stroking her stomach. He asked why she was doing that. The brunette placed his palm on top of the girl's hand. Renya, embarrassed, admitted that it helped ease the pain. Beldemer gladly offered his help. He assured the girl that, with his big hands, it would be more effective. Renya was delighted, but reminded him that the brunette did not like other people's touches, although they had kissed so many times that she had lost count. The brunette chuckled. He put his hands on the girl's stomach and thought. He agreed that he didn't like them, but now he understood that something had changed in him. The girl blushed with embarrassment. She carefully watched her husband's hand movements. Beldemir admitted that he did not feel any repulsion towards the brunette. Renya wondered if it was because of her wish. The wizard admitted that he wasn't entirely sure, but the brunette was convinced that when it came to the girl, he felt the opposite. Beldemir touched the girl's naked belly sensually. The girl trembled from the gentle touches. Unexpectedly, the wizard pressed his lips to Renya's neck. Kissing the girl tenderly, he admitted that he felt simply amazing. A frightened girl's scream was heard late in the morning in the cozy estate that belonged to the guild. Renya was terrified. She overslept. The brunette quickly ran down the stairs, her feet barely touching the steps. The girl asked Shapiro why he hadn't woken her up. The blonde remembered the lady's threat. He calmly explained to the girl that she had warned him about the consequences of invading her privacy. Renya angrily asked if the familiar really didn't understand that there was a big difference between these situations. The blonde didn't see any difference. Beldemir slowly descended the stairs. The man said that he wanted to look at Renya. The wizard saw a strange picture. The girl was tormenting Shapiro. The brunette screamed that she was late. A moment later, the doors slammed behind her with a loud bang. The man noted with confusion that becoming a good husband turned out to be much more difficult than he thought. The girl was hurrying home as fast as she could. Her long skirts were tangled in her legs. Her hair was flying from running so fast. The young lady realized with horror that she was late. The girl walked down the corridor of the mansion with restraint. Our heroine carried shopping bags in her hands. The brunette thought doubtfully that going through the city center to get to the guild was not a good idea. Renya thought sarcastically that it was a great idea. She doubted that this way no one would be able to guess that she had spent the night away from home. On the other hand, she bought clothes for Edwin. The girl was upset why it was so hard to get rid of bad habits. The brunette sighed heavily and remembered that she had also bought something for Beldemir. Suddenly, she was called out. Freya stood in the hallway and looked at the brunette. The maid, smiling falsely, asked if the lady had gone out somewhere early in the morning. The redhead noticed the bags in the young lady's hands. She noticed that they looked like clothes for Mr. Edwin. The brunette said that these were things from the latest collection. The girl did not understand why of all people she met Freya. The maid noticed that the lady always bought him clothes. She said that the brunette asked for a divorce, although she still loved the master. Renaya tensed up at what she heard. She confidently told the maid that she would do everything to ensure the divorce took place. Nervous and shaking with tension, the brunette said that she had ordered these things in advance, but only today she decided to pick them up. The red-haired homewrecker smiled happily. She said that everything was clear to her. Renya stared at the vile maid in surprise. She didn't understand what the maid was planning. At first, the brunette thought that the redhead and Edwin were crazy about each other. The young lady had questions for her cunning rival, but due to the situation with Beldemir, she could not ask them. The brunette understood that if Freya discovered that her terrible mistress was married to 2 men, she would give the girl away without a second thought. That's why the girl had to be sure that the maid didn't suspect anything. Renia handed the package to the maid and ordered her to give it to Edwin. The maid doubted. She asked if the lady was sure of her actions. Didn't she really want to give her husband a gift herself? The brunette pretended to cry. The mistress told the maid that the lord would probably be more pleased if he received a gift from Freya. Renya walked down the corridor, whining and pretending to cry. Freya promised to tell the master that the gift was from the lady. The girl thanked the maid. After moving away a little, our heroine thought about how tiresome it all was. Freya chuckled, not taking her eyes off the lady. Late in the evening, Annie came to remind the lady that it was time for her to go. After all, Renaya was expected in another house. The young lady reluctantly threw off the blanket. In a tired voice, she asked if it was really time already. The maid was frightened by what she saw. She screamed, asking what had happened to the lady's face. Renya was shaking all over. Her face had turned gray. The girl had no strength. The maid excitedly asked if her mistress was feeling well. The brunette got out of bed with difficulty. Everything had gone so far that it was beginning to affect the girl's well-being. The maid made the bed. Her gaze fell on the package that stood by the bed. She cried out in surprise. Taking the package in her hands, Annie asked the lady what it was. The brunette admitted that she had decided to buy the wizard new clothes while she was choosing things for Edwin. Beldemer was surprised by the gift for him. He told Renya that it was not necessary. The girl admitted that she hoped that the wizard would like it. The brunette said that whatever was in this package, he liked everything. The restless Shapiro, at this time, without permission, looked into the package. The blonde froze in surprise at what he saw. He turned to Lady Renya with surprise. The girl broke out in a cold sweat when Shapiro pulled 2 pairs of identical trousers out of the bag and asked why she bought them. Or was it some kind of mistake? The girl froze at what she saw. Renya quickly tried to come up with a plausible answer. The young lady remembered how, in the boutique, she told the salesperson that she would take a pair of trousers of the same size. The girl explained her strange double purchase to the seller by saying that her husband had often been sloppy lately. She explained her purchase to the brunette by saying that the boutique had a promotion, and the second pair of trousers was free. With every purchase, Renya asked how she could refuse. It wouldn't be a big deal if Beldemer had spare trousers. The magician replied that she was right. Renia happily replied that she knew Beldemer would be able to understand her. She breathed a sigh of relief. She was glad that a catastrophe had not happened. Suddenly, the girl froze again. After all, if there were identical trousers in one bag, then that meant that there were 2 identical shirts in Edwin's bag. The brunette felt sick from the realization of what she had done and fainted. Beldemer managed to catch his wife, preventing her from falling. Having come to her senses a little, the brunette said that it looked like she had overworked herself today. Most likely, she needed to go to bed earlier. The brunette noted that the girl really did look tired. He offered to help her up to their bedroom. Renia could hardly stand on her feet. The familiar promised Lady Renya that he would sort out the matter with these trousers. The girl, half fainting, mumbled her agreement and called the servant Edwin. The girl screamed, realizing that she had misspoken, and covered her mouth with her hand in fear. Her eyes widened. Beldemer and the familiar looked at the frightened brunette in surprise. The pause dragged on. Renia was terrified and didn't know what to do. The men's close attention made her nervous. The brunette looked at Renya carefully. An unkind light lit up his eyes. The young man ingratiatingly asked who this Edwin was. Freya stared at the 2 identical shirts, confused. The maid noted that Lady Renya had never made such a mistake before. The red-haired maid thought. The maid did not understand what was happening and what her mistress was doing. Passions were running high in the estate, far from the bustle of the city. Beldemer and the familiar demanded an explanation from the brunette as to who Edwin was. The blonde did not hide his suspicion. He emphasized that this name belonged to a man. He explained to the gentleman that the lady spoke of him as if they had known each other for a long time. And the blonde had no doubt that the lady had pronounced this name very often. Shapiro insisted that this name belonged to someone with whom the lady had a special relationship. The familiar wanted to destroy the girl with his words. Beldemer remained thoughtfully silent, peering intently at the brunette. The young lady flared up. The girl attacked Shapiro with her fists, angry that the servant dared to say such a thing. Renya begged the brunette not to listen to the familiar. She explained that Edwin was just a colleague. The brunette pointed her finger at the blonde impolitely. She explained that she was embarrassed because that colleague looked like Shapiro. The familiar laughed at what he heard. He told the lady that it was hard to believe. Renya clarified that the blonde meant Shapiro turned up his nose and doubted the truth of the girl's words. He explained that he did not believe that an ordinary person could achieve such perfection. The blonde boasted that Mr. Beldemer had created it at the cost of incredible effort. The familiar was outraged by the unheard-of impudence that they tried to compare him to some mortal. Renya clutched her head. The girl explained that she only wanted to say that Edwin's clothes and hair reminded her of a blonde man. Shapiro understood. The blonde admitted that there was a point to it. Beldemer agreed with the familiar. He stated that no mortal could compare to his creation. Renya exhaled tiredly. The girl watched her interlocutors. She was glad that they bought it, but the brunette didn't know how much longer she could hide the fact that she had two husbands. The next day, it was cloudy outside. The brunette peered into the windows of the house. He noticed that it might start raining soon. Renaya sat on the bed with her legs dangling. The girl happily declared that it was good that she woke up early today. The brunette did not take his eyes off the glass. The girl asked Beldomere what he was looking at. The wizard stared thoughtfully at the street. The girl approached her husband and also peered out the window. She sighed heavily and asked what her husband was planning to do today. The brunette looked at Renya in surprise. It seemed to him that she had never asked such questions before. The man answered reservedly that he planned to do what he always did: study new materials and conduct research. Watching her husband, the girl realized that she had always perceived it as a great stroke of luck that Beldomere never left the house. But Renya noted that the young man spent all day looking out the window, waiting for her. With sadness, the brunette realized that Beldomere had fulfilled her wish and became her husband. And she had deceived him. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Renya thought that she had been a lousy wife. The brunette noticed a change in his wife's mood and anxiously asked what had happened. The young lady wiped her tears with her hand. The brunette understood that she should have been ashamed because Beldomere tried to be a good husband with all his might. Suddenly, the brunette's mood changed. She asked her husband what flowers he liked. The brunette replied that he hadn't thought about it. Smiling, Beldomere explained that it all depended on whether the flowers were needed for the spells. He wondered what his favorite flowers were. The brunette coughed and asked Renya what flowers she liked. The brunette was embarrassed by the unexpected question. She thought about it. Renya admitted that she liked roses. The brunette smiled and said that his favorite flowers back then were roses. The girl laughed. She called Beldomere's words stupid. After all, the wizard could not be sure of it. Beldomere became serious. He stroked the girl's cheek tenderly. He admitted that he liked everything that she liked. The girl's heart skipped a beat from such honest words. Beldomere sincerely admitted that he trusted her taste. Renia was embarrassed. Her face was flushed. The girl wondered if he would always be like this now, after her research. The brunette remembered with satisfaction the books he had studied. Now it seemed to the wizard that his research had justified itself. The young man laughed happily. He decided that he was going to be the best husband in the world. Beldomere pulled his wife to him, not taking his eyes off the girl. The girl cried out in admiration. She too was looking at the brunette with all her eyes. At the same time, in the Coriolano Guild, the blonde man was looking through the documents. Edwin concluded that the books were kept much more carefully than he had assumed. Thoughtfully tapping his forehead with his long fingers, the man concluded that everything was in its place, but the blonde man's thoughts returned to his wife. He could not understand why Renya, time after time, asked for a divorce. He wondered why she needed it. He remembered how Renya gave him new clothes from the latest collection. She admired them and hoped that they would look just great on her husband. The blonde had no doubt that it was somehow connected with. At first, he didn't even believe that such a thing could happen. The young man was shocked by the thoughts that came into his head. He wondered if Renya could have been involved in this. Lord Edwin Lepore was determined. If things were as he assumed, there was no way the man could grant Renya a divorce. Renaya wandered around the estate. The girl looked sadly at the greenery. The brunette asked the brown-haired woman what had happened to her. The young man watched his wife with concern. She was sad. Beldomere asked the young woman why she looked upset. The girl burst into tears. A young woman complained that nothing she planted had blossomed. This was all due to the heavy rains that had been going on all week. The girl was also upset that nothing grew, even after all the effort she had put in. The familiar didn't understand why Lady Renya was telling him to have a personal life. But at the same time, the brunette was forcing him to work for her around the clock. The girl watched the familiar. She replied that it was wonderful to live for oneself and be faithful to one's masters. Beldomere tried to calm his wife down. He asked her not to worry. The man believed that the plants would bloom the following year. Renya understood everything. She admitted that she just wanted the view from the window to be at least a little nicer. The brunette realized that the wizard spent all day looking out the window. She wanted the flowers to please his eyes. Beldemer stared at the girl in bewilderment. He asked if she really meant to say that she had planted the flowers for him. The young woman was embarrassed and blushed slightly. She admitted that she most likely did it for him. She reminded him that the wizard always cooked such a delicious dinner. She said that she also wanted to do something good for him. Beldemer was touched by the brunette's words. He thought that his wife really was so kind and caring. The girl was sobbing, lamenting that everything was lost now. The wizard wondered why she thought so. Beldemer smiled slyly and reminded that the girl still had a husband who could bring these flowers back to life. Rania froze at these words and stared at the brunette with admiration. The young man asked if his wife wanted to see how these roses would bloom. The girl had a thought. She cried out excitedly that she would very much like these roses to bloom. The man was glad to hear that. Magic flowed from the wizard's hands. Renya watched what was happening with affection. The brunette was delighted. A moment, and before the brunette's eyes, a multitude of flowers blossomed. Scarlet rosebuds pleased the eye. Sometimes the girl forgot that she was married to a magician. The wizard stood next to the delighted girl. The brunette admitted that he was ready to do everything so that Renya would not want it. Beldemer admitted to the brunette that the roses were beautiful. He picked one flower and, smiling, handed it to his wife. Renya looked at the brunette with wide eyes. The girl reached out and grabbed her husband by the shirt. She pulled the brunette sharply towards her and planted a kiss on the confused Beldemer's cheek. The young man was embarrassed and confused. He pressed his hands to his flushed face. Renya, frightened, watched her husband. The brunette waved her hands in fear. In her defense, the girl screamed that this only happened because the roses were so beautiful. The girl looked at the wizard with loving eyes. The brunette, in her defense, admitted that the scent of roses confused her. Beldemer was silent. The brunette admitted that the brunette was so irresistible when he said that he could do everything for her. Renya was upset. She felt guilty. In any case, she asked Beldemer to forgive her. The girl hung her head low and did not look at the magician. Suddenly, a warm male hand touched the girl's hot cheek. She looked up at her husband with eyes full of tears. Beldemer gently touched his cheek to Renya's cheek. He said that the girl had nothing to apologize for. The man smiled, looking at the girl. He asked if she had forgotten who he was again. Why apologize for just kissing her husband? Beldemer reached out to the girl and planted a kiss on her lips. Renya stared at her husband in surprise. The brunette said words of regret. Renya said that if the wizard felt like that, she promised that she wouldn't do it again. The brunette moved away from the brunette. The magician reminded Renya that it was probably time for the girl to go to work. The wizard remembered the rule that a good husband would never stand between his wife and her career. Renya was angry. The brunette walked next to the girl into the house. Renya was angry and indignant. Why the guild opened so early? She said that it was simply ridiculous. Renya thought about what she should tell the Lord to change the schedule. Beldemer smiled happily. He suspected that perhaps it was the desire of the brunette that had unexpectedly turned his life into an exciting adventure. Renya returned to the mansion in a great mood. The girl walked down the corridor, cheerfully humming something to herself. Freya stood frozen in the depths of the corridor. The maid watched the lady furtively. She thought with suspicion that something was definitely wrong. The maid wondered why the mistress had bought 2 identical shirts. Not to mention that she hadn't even asked if the maid had given them to Edwin. The red-haired homewrecker saw only 2 reasons for this. Either something distracted Renya, or she didn't care how Edwin would react to her gift. Freya decided that she had to get to the bottom of this if it had anything to do with her mistress's wishes. Suddenly, a soft voice called Freya by name. The girl screamed in fear and turned towards the voice. Basil was standing behind her, grinning cheerfully. The girl told the young man that he had scared her, and that he shouldn't have sneaked up on her like that. The guy apologized. He said that most likely the girl did not hear him calling her. The servant conveyed the request of Master Edwin, who wished to dine with the red-haired maid. Freya grimaced and replied that she hadn't been feeling well today. She said that dinner would only make things worse. The girl put a smile on her face and asked him to convey her apologies to Mr. Edwin. Freya instantly changed and became incredibly sweet and pleasant. The girl asked Basil if he could do this for her. Edwin's personal servant asked the girl not to worry and trust him. He asked if she had taken her medicine. He offered to bring her something. The maid did not look at her interlocutor. Exhaling sharply, she thanked the guy and said that she would like to be left alone. Freya watched from the side as the mistress and her personal servant, having thrown on cloaks with a hood, hurried somewhere. The maid knew she had to be alone, because it was time for her to find out what Renya was hiding. The Lepore mansion was silent. Edwin was in his study, drinking tea leisurely. The blonde was wondering if Renya could have been involved in this matter. 3 months ago, Edwin spoke with the Marquis. The man told him that the kingdom could soon be on the brink of disaster. Marquis Chiron was the former knight commander of the first prince. He found it strange that the second prince had been acting very suspiciously lately. Edwin cringed. The man felt unsure. He wondered if the Marquis suspected that the second prince was planning a rebellion. The stern interlocutor studied Edwin carefully. The man asked whether it was true that the blonde had sworn allegiance to the first prince. The young lord confirmed that he had sworn. However, as a knight of a family that had lost its position, the young lord doubted that he could change anything. The knight insinuated whether Edwin was ready to prove his loyalty to the first prince once again. Perhaps, if it turned out that there was a task that only Lord Lepore could handle. The blonde man answered in the affirmative. The Marquis revealed that someone was smuggling weapons and secretly passing them on to the second prince. The man's brows furrowed sternly. He said they could have redirected the weapon back here, to Pelipor. Edwin paused. The young man wondered if his interlocutor suspected that Coriolano's guild was involved. The Marquis sympathetically reported that this was a sad conclusion they had come to. The interlocutor would like Edwin to check if this was true and find proof of the transfer of gold and weapons from the guild to the capital. In that case, the knight commander was confident that they would be able to nip the rebellion in the bud. The Marquis of Sharon gazed at the reflection of a frightened Edwin in the bottom of his cup. He said that even if the young man could find evidence of the guild's betrayal, he, his house, and his wife could receive a pardon. The blonde man stood up and walked over to the window. Looking into the transparent glass, the young man thought, if Renya really was working with the second prince, then she wanted to get a divorce to cover up the guild's rebellion. Suddenly, Edwin noticed a familiar female figure outside the window, who was behaving strangely. Freya tried not to attract attention to herself. The red-haired maid was turning her head from side to side and chasing someone. The blonde was surprised to see Freya on the street. After all, the maid said that she was unwell. Edwin wondered where the maid was heading. The young man resolutely followed Freya. The blonde was sure that if the girl went somewhere, then something had happened to her family. Hiding behind the nearest corner, the blonde suddenly noticed another familiar figure. His surprise knew no bounds. For a moment, Edwin doubted. But then he realized that it was indeed Renya. The wizard happily welcomed Renya home. The brunette, standing on the steps, noticed that the girl did not need to go up to him. The young man himself was ready to go down to his wife. Renaya, a little embarrassed, admitted that she could not wait for their meeting. Beldemer admitted that he could not allow his wife to waste her precious time. The wizard looked at Renya with a gentle smile. The brunette doubted whether the magician was sure of this. After all, he was in no mood at all in the morning. The brunette was gallant and courteous. He admitted that he was so influenced by the beauty of his wife. Shapiro watched the proceedings attentively. The familiar realized that it was time to leave. The blonde apologized and informed the gentleman that he had gone to prepare dinner. The brunette looked tenderly into the girl's eyes. Beldemer told that now all that worried him was that his beautiful wife had come home. Renya enjoyed the moment. The lips of the young people touched in a tender kiss. The girl felt bliss. Suddenly, an unpleasant thought struck her. Renya thought about divorcing Edwin. It turned out that once her wish was fulfilled, the wizard would turn back into a statue, and that meant she would be alone again. Thoughts were confused in her head. The girl decided that she should not try to get a divorce. She considered that this was her last chance for a happy family life. Renya understood that if this was going to happen sooner or later, she had to enjoy it to the fullest. Their kiss became more passionate. The wizard suddenly pushed the girl away from him. The magician confessed to Renya that she was a great kisser. The brunette doubted whether he really thought so. The brunette abruptly changed the subject. He told Renya that she was probably hungry. He suggested that they go out for dinner. Renaya suddenly burst out laughing. The girl laughed, holding her stomach. Beldemar asked what made her laugh so much. The brunette couldn't utter a word from laughter. Having caught her breath a little, the girl admitted that she was so happy at that moment. Beldemar felt incredible tenderness for his wife. The young people were sitting on the stairs. They looked at each other with loving eyes. The idyll of the couple in love was interrupted by Shapiro. The familiar invited them to follow him to the table. He said that the dinner would soon get cold. Suddenly, the blond man tensed up. Shapiro turned to the gentleman and admitted that he had felt the presence of a stranger. The blonde froze, looking ahead. The familiar quietly said that there was someone standing behind the front door. The familiar was sure that he had locked the gate when Lady Renya came home. Whoever it was, it turned out that he had climbed over the fence. Beldemar headed for the front doors. The brunette decided that in that case they had to find out who it was. The wizard asked Renya to stand behind him. The young man explained his request by saying that it was safer for the girl. Shapiro extended his hand towards the door. The familiar said that he was ready to open the door. The massive front door opened without breaking the silence that followed. The wizard and Renya watched intently. The familiar looked at the uninvited guest warily. He asked how he could help him. The stranger asked him to forgive him for the intrusion, but the young man admitted that he was looking for someone. Renya cowered behind the wizard in fear. The girl recognized that voice. Edwin, looking into the familiar's eyes, admitted that he was sure that his wife had entered this house. Beldemar tensed up and asked again if he or the stranger was sure that it was his wife. The blonde was sure that he had seen. The familiar did not let the stranger finish. Shapiro hastened to assure the blonde that he was mistaken, but the blonde had already noticed Renya, who was hiding behind the wizard's back. The uninvited guest pointed his finger at the girl and said that it was she, his wife. The blonde continued to point his finger at the brunette. Beldemar looked back at Renya, stunned. His eyes showed misunderstanding and distrust. A dim light was pouring through the half-open door of the estate. Freya hid in the rose bushes and watched the proceedings with a grin. The red-haired rival gloated. The maid wondered, was it really just an affair? The maid hoped that the lady could lead her to the statue that granted wishes, or to someone who knew where she was going. Freya sighed in disappointment. The maid thought with regret that it was just the lady's lover. The maid hurried to clean up. However, this was indeed a very interesting turn of events. Although it seemed to the red-haired maid that the brown-haired girl always thought only about Edwin. And then it turned out that the lady had been cheating all this time. Freya chuckled, noting that her lady was not such a hopeless fool. In the house, the familiar tried to figure out what the blonde wanted to say when he claimed that this woman was his wife. Renya was incredibly scared and shocked by what was happening. The girl wanted to disappear, evaporate, and for none of this to happen. The blonde said that he seemed to have forgotten to introduce himself. He said that his name was Edwin Lepore. The young wizard shuddered at the familiar name, Edwin. Beldemar asked the blonde man's name. Edwin was genuinely pleased. The young lord realized that his name was familiar to the brunette. The familiar said that they only knew Edwin, who worked with the mistress in the guild. Renya was frightened and confused. The girl felt weak and dizzy. The young lady was thinking about what she had done. The brunette was lamenting why she had come straight here. Edwin looked at the brunette with disdain. Smiling, he said that there was no one like him in the guild. Moreover, it was impossible for his wife to serve as a simple worker in her father's guild. At these words, Renya backed away, trying to hide. Beldemar frowned. The wizard, surprised, asked if his interlocutor really meant that the brunette was the daughter of the guild leader. The situation was heating up. The two young men looked at each other angrily. Lightning seemed to flash between them. Shapiro hastened to intervene. The familiar asked for forgiveness, but noticed that the shirts of the two young men seemed very similar to him. Edwin arrogantly stated that the only one who bought clothes for him was his wife. Renya tried to disappear, curling up into a ball. Beldemar was shocked by what he heard. Each word caused pain in the wizard's chest. The young man said with difficulty that the blonde's wife was Renya. Clutching his head, The brunette asked for permission in a strangled voice and asked how long they had been married. Edwin, turning to his wife for confirmation and help, said that they had been married for 3 years. The wizard felt sick. The young man was struck dead by such information. He staggered, and the familiar rushed towards his master in fear. Edwin noticed that it would be foolish of him to waste their time any longer, so he asked him to excuse him and headed for the exit. Already at the door, the blonde looked back and turned to Renya, promising that they would definitely continue this conversation at home. The girl screamed for Edwin to stop. The blonde froze, exhaling sharply. Renya ran after her husband. She asked the blonde to wait a second. Turning around abruptly, the blonde rudely said that even in his wildest fantasies, he could not allow Renya to cheat on him. With her head down, the young lady, stuttering and embarrassed, reminded her husband of his relationship with Freya. The blonde insisted that his wife was wrong. The brunette flared up and wanted Edwin to simply admit it. Admit that he had an affair with Freya. Edwin didn't think it was the right time or place to argue about it. He noted that, as he could see, his wife had other pressing matters. The house was restless. The familiar tried to shout to the master. He wondered if the wizard had heard him. The brunette was worried about Beldemer. A jerk, and the girl ran into the house as fast as she could. The brunette's hair was fluttering in the wind, and she lifted her voluminous skirts so that they wouldn't get in the way as she ran. The blond man watched his wife in shock. Clenching his hands into fists, he watched her run away. The young man could not believe what had happened. The menacing familiar, arms folded across his chest, interrogated Renya. Shapiro wanted to know if that was really her name. The brunette nodded, confirming. Beldemer, exhausted, lay on the bed, covering his eyes with his hands. The young man suffered silently. Shapiro asked if it was true that the guild the girl said she worked for belonged to her father. Again, the answer was yes. The familiar smiled sadly. He wondered if all this talk about living her own life was also part of a plan to hide her secret. Renya smiled. The girl admitted that she said it only so that Shapiro would not interfere with their honeymoon. The familiar burst out laughing. The blonde mockingly repeated the phrase mi.vim me sietsem, syllable by syllable. He asked if that was what the blonde really meant. Renya realized that everything was hopeless. The girl admitted that she did not want to deceive Beldemer. After all, she only thought about getting a divorce. The young lady was inconsolable. The brunette asked Beldemer to believe her. The brunette lay on the bed. His body was shaking. He couldn't even imagine that his wife had a second husband. Was he really supposed to be her spare husband? Pressing her lips together, the brunette thought about how he had come to this. He was the great mage Beldemer. Did Renya really assign him such a role? The young lady's face suddenly changed, and she said with a smile that she still had good news. Shapiro, with a mocking intonation, asked the girl, in that case, to tell. He admitted that they simply could not wait to hear them. The brunette laughed cheerfully and said that when she managed to divorce her husband, then her wish could come true. All attention was on Beldemer. The brunette asked if the brown-haired woman really wanted to say that the reason why the wish didn't come true was because he wasn't her husband, but only her lover. The familiar reported that everything made sense now. He admitted that he knew Lady Renya was hiding something from the master as soon as he saw her. The girl's eyes filled with bitter tears. Renya quietly muttered that as soon as she could get a divorce, her wish would come true. Renya tried to calm the wizard down by saying that he would no longer have to try so hard to be a good husband to her. Beldemer was disconcerted. All his dreams were shattered in an instant. The young man muttered to Renya that he did not want to see her anymore. The wizard was worried and tormented. He insisted that the brunette should return to her husband. Renya tried to object, but Beldemer refused to even look at the girl. The young man firmly asked her to leave. Renya was confused. She wondered if, even now that Edwin knew the reason, he still refused to divorce her. The young people were sitting in the library in a tense atmosphere. The blonde, looking up at his wife, replied that it was indeed so. Renia was shocked by the answer. The brunette asked in confusion why. She had said that she could pay for Edwin's sister's wedding. Edwin never admitted to anyone that he had always wanted a divorce. But being just a commodity in their deal, he couldn't do it. The blonde could only hope that Renya herself would one day ask for an annulment of their marriage. And finally it happened. Only Edwin could not understand why he did not feel joy from it. Looking down at his cup of tea, the blonde asked his wife what the name of the brunette with whom he had seen the girl at the estate was. The girl cut her husband off abruptly. The brunette indignantly said that in her opinion, this could not concern Edwin. Deep inside, the blonde always thought that Renya loved only him. Was this really what he always wanted? Looking intently at the brunette, Edwin asked how well his wife knew the brunette. The young lord was curious to know more about his rival. He asked what the guy did for a living. The brunette looked at her husband in bewilderment. Renya didn't understand why they had to talk about this. Edwin remembered the brunette. He noted that the guy was quite good-looking. He had never met such an attractive man. The wife admitted that her friend was doing very important research. The blonde suspected that, most likely, the rival could have seduced Renya. Edwin concluded that, to put it another way, the brunette did not have a normal job. The blonde asked if he was right when he suspected that his rival knew about Renya's work in the guild. Renya confirmed his words. The girl was outraged. She did not understand how much longer this interrogation could continue. The blonde wondered if her rival could have set up their meeting because he found out that Renya worked in her father's guild. I wondered if the brunette could be the second prince's man, someone who could use Renya. Edwin rose abruptly from the table and said decisively that he could not give Renya a divorce now. The girl was perplexed. She could not understand why her husband did not agree. It did not seem like the blonde loved her. Renya screamed and pounded the table. She demanded that Edwin explain everything to her. The blonde walked away, telling his wife not to pressure him. The blonde understood that he would not be able to divorce his wife until the investigation was completed. He advised the girl to sue him if she wanted a divorce so badly. The husband's words knocked the girl out. After all, polyandry could have been punished with 10 years behind bars. It was a defeat. The blonde decided that it was not worth mentioning that he did not like the man. He looked back at his wife and advised her to stay away from the brunette. Assuming that even if the stranger was just her lover, Edwin recommended that the girl find someone who would inspire more trust. Stuttering from resentment and confusion, the brunette decided to find out what her husband could say about Freya. The blonde ignored his wife's question. The massive door closed behind him with a loud bang. Renya was left alone and without any clear answers. The bright flames devoured the pages. The crackling of the logs mingled with the rustle of the burning books. Sparks flew up, leaving behind only ash and emptiness. Beldemer ordered his familiar to burn all the books that were on his desk. Shapiro was worried about his poor master. The blonde did not understand why, out of all the women in the world, he chose this bitch. An unexpected sound interrupted his thoughts. The girl called his name. The familiar turned sharply towards the uninvited guest. The servant looked at the brunette with disdain. He rudely asked how Lady Renya dared to show up here. The girl held out a small box of medicines. She admitted that these were recommendations from a good doctor. The blonde watched the lady with hostility. He decided that since she had come all the way here, he would tell his master about her arrival. Shapiro dropped the box of medicines on the floor and approached the girl. He said that he had heard about the royal law that prohibited polyandry. He reported that for his violations, the girl faced imprisonment for 10 years. Renya was puzzled. Why would a familiar know about the laws? She frowned and wondered what Shapiro was threatening her with. The servant shook his finger and reminded her of the condition. This could only happen if the young lady did not get divorced. The familiar sincerely admitted that nevertheless, what was most important to him was that his master be freed from his oath. He reminded her that Renya's wish was the key to the wizard's freedom. It was the only reason why the blonde would not interfere with her. Shapiro said that Lady Renya could count herself very lucky. Both were oblivious to the crackling of books being burned in the fireplace. Beldemer sat up in bed with difficulty. The brunette settled down on a hard chair next to the bed. The girl asked how the wizard was feeling. Beldemer was upset and sad. The brunette exclaimed that after his first kisses were taken from him by deception, how could he feel? The wizard admitted that this was the most terrible thing that had happened to him in his entire life. Renia clenched her fists. The girl was very nervous and worried about Beldemer's condition. She admitted that she was very sorry. Suddenly, the brunette looked at Renya intently. He asked the girl to answer one question. He was interested in whether this was a marriage of convenience for the girl. Our heroine lowered her eyes shyly. She admitted that this was indeed the case. Her father wanted the brunette to receive a noble title. The girl honestly told that the Lepore family was drowning in debt. Edwin married the brunette on the condition that her father would be able to pay off his family's bills. Beldemer realized that the girl had managed to get the title. Brunette concluded that Renaya's marriage had not worked out. The wizard came to the conclusion that it was then that Renya made her wish, because she felt sincere feelings for him. The brunette cleared his throat tensely. He closed his eyes and asked the girl if she had really decided to get a divorce for him. The brunette gasped in surprise. The young lady remembered how the dead Edwin chased her through the cemetery and confessed his love to her. Renya didn't tell the brunette about it. The brunette said that it was because of him that she decided to get a divorce. The girl understood that this happened only because the wizard fulfilled her first wish too literally. The brunette looked sideways at Beldemer. She remembered that the brunette had been gentle with her the second time. The girl confirmed the wizard's assumption. She told Beldemer that she wanted to divorce her husband because of him. Renya smiled tenderly, looking at the wizard. The girl hoped that the brunette could wait a little. She believed that she could find a way to get a divorce. Renya walked quickly down the street, thinking about her divorce. Although she wanted it with all her passion, she did not understand how she could convince Edwin. Suddenly, the girl stopped. Ahead, she saw a terrible picture. Her brother and father were being arrested by guards. Renya ran to her loved ones. The men were held back by cloaked knights. The girl's father's hands were tied, and her brother was still trying to resist. The brunette did not understand what was happening. She tried to get closer to her relatives, but one of the guards pushed the girl with force, ordering her to move away. The young lady staggered from the strong push and almost fell. The girl was supported by her uncle. The man asked if Renia was okay. The father tried to calm the brunette down. He asked the girl not to worry. He explained that nothing serious had happened. The brunette's father managed to shout to Camille that he was entrusting his daughter and the guild into his hands. The girl watched in bewilderment as the guards led her family away. She didn't understand what was going on here. Our heroine rushed to her uncle with questions. She asked why the guards had taken her father. Camille admitted that he was suspected of tax evasion. The brunette was stunned by this news. The girl could not understand how this could happen. How could her father be suspected of tax evasion? Uncle Camille couldn't believe that the Lord could do this to them. The man was sure that they had been paying him regularly all this time. The older relative grabbed the girl by the shoulders. He was sure that Renya was supposed to meet the Lord. There was a chance that the girl could get an appointment with him if Edwin could go with her. The brunette was unpleasantly surprised that her husband's name had come up. She didn't understand how that could happen. Edwin was not alone in the library. The blonde asked Freya why she was following his wife. The cunning maid decided that she should confirm the blonde's suspicions. Nothing could make the Lord turn away from her. The girl said that she had seen Lady Renya leave through the back door several times in the morning. The girl also said that later, the lady asked her to give Edwin a gift, which turned out to be 2 identical shirts. Freya suspected that this information was meant to satisfy his curiosity. Edwin was quite meticulous. She decided it was better to be on the safe side. The girl continued her story. She blamed her mistress for the fact that the lady then returned and demanded the shirts back, saying that she had made a mistake. The red-haired maid said she knew it was wrong, but she decided she needed to make sure of something. The blonde nervously drummed his fingers on the table. He asked if that was really why the girl had decided to follow Renya. The blonde man wondered what the red-haired maid wanted to achieve. Freya clenched her fists. The girl tried to feign modesty and obedience. The maid's eyes filled with fake tears. The maid said that she hoped that she could help Master Edwin. The girl feigned remorse. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. She asked him to forgive her for her impudence. Edwin said that was not what he meant. The blonde apologized to Freya. He asked her to forgive him for his rudeness. The maid, once again, was convinced that everything was as easy as pie, as always. Edwin wanted to say something else to the maid, but suddenly there was a crash, and his name was loudly called. Renya burst into the office like a fury. The girl was burning with anger. The red-haired maid and the blonde man stared at the young lady in confusion. The brunette tried to catch her breath from running fast. The girl wheezed, asking if it was Edwin who had told them. The blonde pretended to end the conversation. He asked Freya to leave them alone. The maid feigned submission and rose from her seat. Renya paid no attention to her rival. She angrily asked Edwin to tell her the truth. Leaning her hands on the massive table, Renya looked angrily at her husband. She wondered if this was really why the blonde checked all the accounting. Edwin defended himself that it was not him. He said that he had not found any evidence of tax evasion. The brunette was surprised. The girl thought about it. She assumed, could it be that the father could have given Edwin false reports? Edwin grabbed his head and said that he did not understand why the guards had arrested Coriolano. The brunette thought about it. She suspected that her father would never have given Edwin the real notes. In that case, the girl decided that her husband should go to the Lord with her. She wanted to ask him for leniency for her father. The blonde, clearly irritated, quickly reminded Renya that the arrest warrant indicated a considerable sum. The brunette was sure they could cover it. She suggested that they just tell the Lord that they would pay for everything. Edwin admitted that it was their duty to pay off the debt, but he was sure that the culprit still had to answer for his sins. Renya was perplexed. The girl asked again what her husband meant by this. Did he really think that her father deserved to stay in prison? The blonde became nervous. The young man tried to explain that this was not what he wanted to say, but the girl angrily asked, who could benefit from the money that was not used to pay taxes? The blonde asked again if Renya was really hinting at him. The young lady was sure that she was right. She reminded the blonde about his sister Emily's tuition, about his mother's hospital bills, and about the upkeep of Edwin's estate. All paid for with that money. The blonde objected. He mentioned that in exchange, the brunette was able to receive a title. Renya reminded her husband that in this case he became part of her family. Renia was in despair. With pain in her voice, she asked her husband why he had agreed to marry her if he had despised her father so much. She warned that otherwise the blonde would have to join the service. Edwin immediately reminded the brunette about his mother. The girl asked Edwin to stop making excuses and just be honest with himself. She said that the blonde couldn't serve. His pride wouldn't allow it. She asked Edwin to admit it. Renya did not look at her husband. The girl accused him of trying to appear honest and fair. Edwina broke out in a cold sweat when the brunette reminded him that at the same time, the blonde man accepted her father's money without asking unnecessary questions. Renya stood in the doorway. The girl looked back and looked at the blonde with disdain. She asked him if he thought that only cowards did that. The door slammed behind the young lady with a loud bang. Edwin was left alone in the room. The blonde grabbed his head. He exhaled sharply. Renya ran quickly down the corridor. The girl wiped her tears with her hands. Annie ran after the lady. She wanted to know what had happened to the lady. Renya confessed to the maid that her husband refused to go with her. The maid was shocked by this news. The brunette was determined. In that case, she decided that she would go to the Lord alone. Beldemer stood by the window with a thoughtful look. The brunette was constantly thinking about his wife. The wizard recalled how Renya cried and said that she understood his reluctance to see her. He remembered how the brunette asked him to promise that Beldemer would take his medication. Beldemer shuddered in surprise. The wizard saw his wife in the window, waving her hand at him. The man blinked and the beautiful vision disappeared. Beldemer grabbed his head. His temples were throbbing. The young man thought that perhaps he really was sick. The man refused to help the brunette. He said that he was not able to always cover for her father. He admitted that he was powerless here. Sighing heavily, Renia headed towards her carriage. The girl clenched her fists in anger. The brunette understood that her interlocutor had covered for her father earlier only because he was counting on marrying her. In the silence of the stranger's yard, a loud creaking of the door was heard, and the brunette climbed into the carriage. The carriage moved off. Renia did not understand what she had to do now. The girl was upset and worried. She wondered how it happened that her father decided to evade taxes. Renya thought that all her efforts were in vain, no matter how hard the brunette tried to make her father become a good man. Staring out the window, the brunette suddenly realized that this was not the way home. The carriage was rushing quickly along the dark forest road. The wheels were creaking. Renya let out a surprised cry. It seemed as if the girl had guessed what had happened. She thought with concern that she had been kidnapped. The brunette admitted to herself that she would not be surprised at all if this really was a kidnapping. Our heroine was aware that she had been a girl from a rich family since childhood, and at the same time, she was a commoner. She was the perfect target. She was first kidnapped at the age of 5. She was treated roughly and told to keep quiet. The little girl cried and begged for someone to save her. At 11 years old, little Renia was shaking with fear and crying, sitting on the cold floor. And the angry kidnapper was rudely ordering the girl to shut up. At 15, Renya no longer reacted to her captors. When she was kidnapped again, the young lady calmly ignored all orders. Carefully removing the hairpin from her hair, Renya did not understand why they decided to kidnap her now, at her age. The brunette opened the carriage door with a hairpin. The girl waited impatiently for the kidnappers to start making all their efforts. The man drove the carriage confidently. He held the reins tightly in his hands. He complained out loud that this road was full of potholes. Talking to himself, the kidnapper chuckled. The bandit was happy that he had hit the jackpot today. Renya abruptly threw open the carriage doors and jumped out of the moving vehicle. The girl fell, hitting herself hard and screaming in pain. The kidnapper braked. The wheels creaked loudly, and the carriage stopped. With one smooth jerk, the bandit jumped to the ground. The man angrily ordered Renya to stand where she stood. Our heroine, taking off her uncomfortable shoes and lifting her skirts, rushed away. Away from this place. In the night forest, the kidnapper tried to find his victim. The man looked around. He did not understand where the girl could have gone. Renya hid behind a large rock, trying not to breathe as the enraged kidnapper walked past her. The man muttered menacingly under his breath that the girl would get hers as soon as he could find her. Renya exhaled heavily. Her heart was beating hard. It hadn't happened for a long time. The brunette tried to remember the last time she was kidnapped. The man's hand was extended to her in a desire to help her up. The blonde asked if everything was okay with the lady. Renya stared at the young lord. Stuttering, the girl admitted that she was not a lady. Edwin delicately questioned the veracity of her words. The young man said that he was enchanted by the brunette. The blonde admitted that he saw a lady in her. Renia recalled that soon after their amazing meeting, they got married. The girl's bare feet stepped silently on the cold ground. Renia couldn't blame her past self. She decided that it was fate. The girl stopped at a spreading tree, her bare feet slapping the grass. Looking back, the brunette didn't understand where she was. A quiet rustle behind her made the girl tense up and freeze in fear. Looking around carefully, the brunette was afraid to see an animal in the bushes. The sound did not subside. Renya did not want to die like this. She waited with horror for who would come out of the bushes. The brunette prepared for battle, although her legs were shaking. Suddenly, a girl appeared from the bushes. The little girl was also shaking with fear. The brunette was in a warlike mood. She clenched her fists, preparing for battle. The stranger watched Renya carefully. A frightened Annie ran into the estate that belonged to the guild. The maid was looking for Lady Renya. Shapiro was outraged. The familiar called Annie's behavior impudent. He considered it unacceptable to break into someone else's house at such a late hour. He grinned and said that the maid would most likely not be able to find Lady Renya here. Annie worriedly asked if the familiar was sure of that. The blonde was wiping his cup with a towel. Closing his eyes, the familiar wondered why he would need to lie to Annie. Suddenly, a wizard entered the room. Beldemer asked the maid what was going on. He asked if something had happened to Renya. The maid stammered that her lady had not yet returned from her trip to the lord's castle. She was certain that her lady had been kidnapped. The wizard clenched his fist tightly. The young man was genuinely perplexed. Who dared to kidnap the wife of the great Beldemer? Brunette reminded Shapiro that everything could go to hell if his wife died before her wish came true. Brunette decided to find her. In the depths of the forest, the windows of a wooden house were dimly lit. They asked Renia if she needed new clothes. They admitted that they only had work clothes. The brunette smiled gratefully. The girl refused the clothes. She simply asked him to tell her the way to the village. Renia was in a remote forest, in a simple house where an ordinary family lived. The girl said that she had just managed to escape from her kidnappers. The head of the family admitted that he knew a path that no one usually walked. In this case, the journey to the village could take longer. The mistress of the house put the pot on the table with a loud bang. Renia thought about the words, "Nobody is coming." She looked at the master of the house intently. The little girl confided to Renia that they were hiding from the law because their family owed some money to the Coriolano Guild. The mistress of the house confirmed that their family owed the guild money. They could no longer pay, so now they were forced to hide here in the forest. The mistress of the house hung her head low. The woman admitted with sadness in her voice that if they had known, they would never have borrowed from Coriolano. The brunette clenched and unclenched her fists. Renia felt awkward about what was happening. Her face was burning with shame. The brunette decided to refuse the help of the hospitable hosts. The girl said that they were already waiting for her on the outskirts of the village. Suddenly, the brunette bowed low to the couple. She thanked them for their help and quietly asked for forgiveness for all the inconvenience caused. Once again, the girl walked barefoot through the forest. Renia thought that the people who had sheltered her were very nice. Suddenly, the thought occurred to me that perhaps Edwin had been right all along. The blonde asked his wife if she really intended to live her whole life with her head in the sand. Then the girl didn't just not understand what the blonde was talking about. She didn't want to understand anything. Renia knew very well the methods her father used to conduct business. The girl turned away, preferring to think that her father simply wanted to control everything. Renia wondered if she could have turned away from what was happening her whole life. The brunette was worried whether she would be able to forget everything that happened once this night came to an end. As she walked deeper into the forest, the brunette doubted that she would be able to forget about something like that. Perhaps she should wish to become a better person. The girl suggested that perhaps she was given a second chance to atone for her sins. Suddenly, Renia stopped. It seemed she had found the solution to the problem. The girl realized that she had to become better. An agitated Edwin ran through the streets of the city and loudly called for his wife. The man could not believe that Renia could really have been kidnapped. The blonde remembered a recent conversation and that unpleasant moment when Renia asked him if he thought that only cowards acted like that. The young man clenched his fists. Edwin realized that he should have gone with his wife. Suddenly, the blonde froze. The wizard and Shapiro stood opposite him. The familiar waved his hand in greeting to Mr. Edwin Lepore. The blonde man resolutely approached the young people. He asked if it was possible that they were looking for his wife. Putting a smirk on his face, the blonde said that if that was the case, then they didn't have to worry. After all, he would be able to find her soon. Beldemir was convinced that if a man could not ensure the safety of his wife, then his life was not worth a penny. Shapiro tried to stop the argument between the two men. He noticed that since they all had the same goal, he suggested that they join forces. Beldemir quickly headed in the opposite direction from the blonde. He told his familiar that they could handle it themselves. Edwin noted that their efforts could be wasted if the brunette went in that direction. He reported that there was no road there. The wizard was a little confused. The young man asked his rival if he was sure about it. Edwin realized that the brunette had a poor sense of direction in the city. He concluded that his wife's lover was not a local. Edwin decided that once he could find Renia, he would need to find out more about who the arrogant brunette was. Beldemir glanced sideways at his rival. He was surprised that his wife's lover didn't bother him at all. Beldemir was unpleasantly surprised by the blonde's conceit. The familiar said that his master was very worried about Lady Renia. Beldemir lost a step from such assumptions. The brunette was only concerned with her wish. It had to be fulfilled, no matter what. The wizard headed resolutely into the forest. Shapiro mentally supported his master. The servant watched Beldemir closely. The blonde and Beldemir found themselves in a forest. The familiar noticed that, as Edwin had said, there was no road here. Shapiro asked if his master could use magic. The brunette confirmed that he could. Since it was for Renia, his magic should definitely work. The brunette realized that if the girl wanted him to find her at that very moment, he could do it. Shapiro's scream pulled the brunette out of his thoughts. The blonde was surprised when he saw Lady Renia. The girl suddenly jumped out of the bushes. Renia froze in surprise. The brunette did not expect to meet Beldemir in this place. The young lady timidly approached the brunette. The girl asked if he was really looking for her. The brunette was perplexed. How did Beldemer know where she was? The young man pulled her towards him. The wizard hugged Renya tightly. The silence was filled with fragile closeness. The brunette's breathing was ragged with joy that the girl had been found.